Yes, but I was not there, Phil. How was the tall, thin bugler who sounded taps? Corrigan. And the little, girl-shaped brown men. My constabulary. I cannot recollect, she said listlessly, laying the doll against her breast. I think, Phil, that you had better be a little quiet. Nosh may wish to sleep. And I am sleepy, too, lifting her slender hand as a sign for him to take his leave. As he went out, the nurse said, if you wish to return to town, you may, I think. She will forget about you for 2 or 3 days, as usual. Shall I telegraph if she becomes restless? Yes, what does the doctor say today? The slim nurse looked at him under level brows. There is no change, she said. No hope, it was not even a question. No hope, Captain Selwyn. He stood silent, tapping his leg with the stiff brim of his hat. Then, wearily, is there anything more I can do for her? Nothing, sir. Thank you. He turned away, bidding her good night in a low voice. He arrived in town about midnight, but did not go to any of his clubs. At one of them a telegram was awaiting him, and in a dismantled and summer-shrouded house, a young girl was still expecting him, lying with closed eyes in a big Holland-covered armchair, listening to the rare footfalls in the street outside. But of these things he knew nothing, and he went wearily to his lodgings and climbed the musty stairs, and sat down in his old attitude before the table and the blank wall behind it, waiting for the magic frescoes to appear in all the vague loveliness of their hues and dyes, painting for him upon his chamber walls the tinted paradise now lost to him forever. Chapter 11: His Own Way. The winter promised to be a busy one for Selwyn. If at first he had had any dread of enforced idleness, that worry, at least, vanished before the first snow flew. For there came to him a secret communication from the government suggesting, among other things, that he report 3 times a week at the proving grounds on Sandy Hook, that experiments with chaosite as a bursting charge might begin as soon as he was ready with his argon primer, that officers connected with the Bureau of Ordnance and the Marine Laboratory had recommended the advisability of certain preliminary tests, and that the general staff seemed inclined to consider the matter seriously. This meant work hard, constant, patient work, but it did not mean money to help him support the heavy burdens he had assumed. If there were to be any returns, all that part of it lay in the future, and the future could not help him now. Yet, unless still heavier burdens were laid upon him, he could hold on for the present. His bedroom cost him next to nothing. Breakfast he cooked for himself, luncheon he dispensed with, and he dined at random anywhere that appeared to promise seclusion, cheapness, and immunity from anybody he had ever known. A minute and rather finicky care of his wardrobe had been second nature to him. The habits of a soldier. Systematized the routine, he was satisfied that his clothes would outlast winter demands, although laundry expenses appalled him. As for his clubs, he hung on to them, knowing the importance of appearances in a town which is made up of them. But this expense was all he could carry, for the demands of the establishment at Edgewater were steadily increasing with the early coming of winter. He was sent for oftener, and a physician was now in practically continual attendance. Also, 3 times a week he boarded the Sandy Hook boat, returning always at night because he dared not remain at the reservation lest an imperative telegram from Edgewater find him unable to respond. So, when in November the first few hurrying snowflakes whirled in among the city's cannons of masonry and iron, Selwyn had already systematized his winter schedule. And when Nina opened her house, returning from Lennox with Eileen to do so, she found that Selwyn had made his own arrangements for the winter, and that, according to the program, neither she nor anybody else was likely to see him oftener than one evening in a week. To Boots she complained bitterly, having had visions of Selwyn and Gerald as permanent fixtures of family support during the season now imminent. I cannot understand, she said, why Philip is acting this way. He need not work like that. There is no necessity because he has a comfortable income. If he is determined to maintain a stuffy apartment somewhere, of course I will not insist on his coming to us as he ought to, but to abandon us in this manner makes me almost indignant. Besides, it's having anything but a salutary effect on Eileen. What effect is it having on Eileen? Inquired Boots curiously. Oh, I do not know, said Nina, coming perilously close to a pout. But I see symptoms indeed I do, Boots. Symptoms of shirking the winter's routine. It's to be a gay season, too, and it's only her second. The idea of a child of that age informing me that she's had enough of the purely social phases of this planet. Did you ever hear anything like it? One season, if you please, and she finds it futile, stale, and unprofitable to fulfill the duties expected of her. Boots began to laugh, but it was no laughing matter to Nina, and she said so vigorously. It's Philip's fault. If he would stand by us this winter, she would go anywhere and enjoy it, too. Besides, he's the only man able to satisfy the blue stocking in her between dances. But he's got this obstinate mania for seclusion, and he seldom comes near us, and it's driving Eileen into herself. Boots, and every day I catch her hair slumping over her ear send. Once I discovered a lead pencil behind him, and a monograph on the Ming dynasty in her lap, all marked up with notes. Oh, Boots, Boots. I have given up all hopes of that brother of mine for her, but she could marry anybody, if she chose anybody, and she could twist the entire social circus into a court of her own and dominate everything. Everybody knows it, everybody says it. And look at her, indifferent, listless, scarcely civil any longer to her own sort, but galvanized into animation, the moment some impossible professor or artist or hairy scientist flutters, bat-like into a drawing room where he does not belong unless he's hired to be amusing. And that sounds horridly snobbish, I know. I am a snob about Eileen, but not about myself, because it does not harm me to make round wonder eyes at a hair professor, or gaze intensely into the eyes of an artist when he's ornamental. It does not make my hair come down over my ears to do that sort of thing, and it does not corrupt me into slinking off to museum lectures, or spending mornings prowling about the society library, or the Chinese jades in the Metropolitan. Boots's continuous and unfeigned laughter checked the pretty, excited little matron, and after a moment she laughed, too. "Dear Boots," she said, "cannot you help me a little? I really am serious. I do not know what to do with the girl. Philip never comes near you once a week for an hour or two, which is nothing, gan the child misses him. The murder is out, Eileen misses him. Oh, she does not say so, she does not hint it, or look it, but I know her, I know. She misses him, she's lonely. And what to do about it, I do not know, Boots, I do not know." Lansing had ceased laughing. He had been indulging in tea-shy vice of his, which led him to haunt houses where that out-of-fashion beverage might still be had. And now he sat, cup suspended, saucer held meekly against his chest, gazing out at the pelting snowflakes. "Boots, dear," said Nina, who adored him, "tell me what to do. Tell me what has gone amiss between my brother and Eileen. Something has. And whatever it is, it began last autumn, that day when you remember the incident." Boots nodded. "Well, it seemed to upset everybody somehow. Philip left the next day, do you remember? And Eileen has never been quite the same. Of course, I do not ascribe it to that unpleasant episode of when a young girl gets over a shock in a day, but that change or whatever it is stated from that night. Philip and Eileen had been inseparable. It was good for them, for her, too. And as for Philwee, he looked about 21. Boots, I had hoped, expected, and I was right. They were on the verge of it." "I think so, too," he said. She looked up curiously. "Did Philip ever say?" "No, he never says, you know. I thought that Menklo's friend sometimes 999. Sometimes in romantic fiction. Phil would not, nor," he added smilingly, "would one." "How do you know, Boots?" she asked, leaning back to watch him out of mischievous eyes. "How do you know what you would do if you were in love with Gladys, for example?" "I know perfectly well," he said, "because I am." "In love?" incredulously. "Of course." "Ah, you mean Drina." "Who else?" he asked lightly. "I thought you were speaking seriously. I all her latent instinct for such meddling aroused, I thought perhaps you meant Gladys." "Gladys who?" he asked blandly. "Gladys Oracle, silly, people said." "Oh Lord," he exclaimed, "if people said, then it's all over. Nina, do I look like a man on a still hunt for a million?" "Gladys is a beauty," retorted Nina indignantly. With the intellect of a Persian kitten, he nodded. "If that was not a nice thing to say, I am sorry. I am ashamed. But do you know, I have come to regard my agreement with Drina so seriously that I take absolutely no interest in anybody else." "Try to be serious, Boots," said Nina. "There are dozens of nice girls you ought to be agreeable to. Austin and I were saying only last night what a pity it is that you do not find either of the Minster twins interesting." I might find them compoundly interesting, he admitted, but unfortunately there's no chance in this country for multiple domesticity and the simpler pleasures of a compound life. It's no use, Nina. I'm not going to marry any girl for ever so long anyway, not until Drina releases me on her 18th birthday. Hello, somebody's coming and I am off. I am not at home, do not go, said Nina, laying one hand on his arm to detain him as a card was brought up. Oh, it's only Rosamund Fane. I did promise to go to the Craigs with her. Do you mind if she comes up? Not if you do not, said Boots blandly. He could not endure Rosamund and she detested him. And Nina, who was perfectly aware of this, had just enough of perversity in her to enjoy their meeting. Rosamund came in breezily, sables powdered with tiny flecks of snow, cheeks like damask roses, eyes of turquoise. How d'ye do? She nodded, greeting Boots askance as she closed with Nina. I came, you see, but do you want to be jammed and mauled and trodden on at the Craigs? No, that's perfect, neither do one. Where is the adorable Eileen? Nobody sees her anymore. She was at the Delmer Carnses yesterday. Was she? Curious I did not see her. Tea? With gratitude, dear, if it's Scotch. She sat erect, the furs sliding to the back of the chair, revealing the rather accented details of her perfectly turned figure. And rolling up her gloves, she laid her pretty head on one side and considered Boots with very bright and malicious eyes. They say, she said, smiling, that some very heavy play goes on in that cunning little new house of yours, Mr. Lansing. Really? He asked blandly. Yes, and I am wondering if it is true. I should not think you would care, Mrs. Fane, as long as it makes a good story. Rosamund flushed, then, always alive to humor, laughed frankly. What a nasty thing to say to a woman, she observed. It fairly reeks impertinence. Mr. Lansing, you do not like me very well, do you? I dare not, he said, because you are married. If you were only free of vinculo matrimoniae. Rosamund laughed again, and sat stroking her muff and smiling. Curious, is not it? She said to Nineveh, inborn antipathy of two agreeable human bipeds for one another. Simile gaudetas, my learned friend will admit. But with us it's the old case of that eminent practitioner, the late Dr. Fell. Esto perpetua, oh well, we cannot help it, can we, Mr. Lansing? And again to Nina, dear, have you heard anything about Alike's Ruthven? I think it is the strangest thing that nobody seems to know where she is. And all anybody can get out of Jack is that she's in a nerve factory or some such retreat and a perfect wreck. She might as well be dead, you know. In that case, observed Lansing, it might be best to shift the center of gossip. De mortuis nil nisi bonum, which is simple enough for anybody to comprehend. That is rude, Mr. Lansing, flashed out Rosamund, and to his astonishment he saw the tears start to her eyes. I beg your pardon, he said sulkily. You do well too. I care more for Alike's Ruthven Thanthan. You give me credit for caring about anybody. People are never wholly worthless. Mr. Lansingenly, the very young think that. Give me credit for one wholly genuine affection, and you will not be too credulous. And perhaps in future you and I may better be able to endure one another when fate lands us at the same teetable. Boots said respectfully, I am sorry for what I said, Mrs. Payne. I hope that your friend Mrs. Ruthven will soon recover. Rosamund looked at Nina, the tears still rimming her lids. I miss her frightfully, she said. If somebody would only tell me where she is, I know it could do no harm for me to see her. I can be as gentle and loyal as anybody when I really care for a person. Do you know where she might be, Nina? No, I do not. I would tell you if I did, Rosamund. Do not you know? Why no, said Nina, surprised at her persistence. Because, continued Rosamund, your brother does. Nina straightened up, flushed and astonished. Why do you say that? She asked. Because he does know. He sent her to Clifton. The maid who accompanied her is in my service now. It's a low way of finding out things, but we all do it. Hesn't alikes Toto Clifton, repeated Nina incredulously. Your maid told you that? Rosamund finished the contents of her slim glass and rose. Yes, and it was a brave and generous and loyal thing for him to do. I supposed you knew it. Jack has been too beastly to her. She was on the verge of breaking down when I saw her on the Niobrara, and she told me then that her husband had practically repudiated her. Then she suddenly disappeared, and her maid later came to me seeking a place. That's how I knew, and that's all I know. And I care for alikes, and I honor your brother for what he 999. She stood with pretty golden head bent, absently arranging the sables around her neck and shoulders. I have been very horrid to Captain Selwyn, she said quietly. Tell him I am sorry, that he has my respect. And if he cares to tell me where a likes is, I shall be grateful and do no harm. She turned toward the door, stopped short, came back and made her adieus, then started again toward the door, not noticing Lansing. With your permission, said Boots at her shoulder in a very low voice. She looked up, surprised, her eyes still wet. Then, comprehending the compliment of his attendance, acknowledged it with a faint smile. Good night, he said to Nina. Then he took Rosamund down to her brougham with a silent formality that touched her present sentimental mood. She leaned from her carriage window, looking at him where he stood, hat in hand, in the thickly falling snow. Please without ceremony, Mr. Lansing, and, as he covered himself, may I not drop you at your destination? Thank you and refusal. I thank you for being nice to me. Please believe there is often less malice than perversity in me. I have a heart, Mr. Lansing, such as it is, and often those I torment most I care for most. It was so with the likes. Goodbye. Boots's salute was admirably formal. Then he went on through the thickening snow, swung vigorously across the avenue to the park wall, and, turning south, continued on parallel to it under the naked trees. It must have been thick weather on the river and along the docks, for the deep foghorns sounded persistently over the city, and the haunted warning of the sirens filled the leaden sky, lowering through the white veil, descending in flakes that melted where they fell. And, as Lansing strode on, hands deep in his overcoat, more than one mystery was unraveling before his keen eyes that blinked and winked as the clinging snow blotted his vision. Now he began to understand something of the strange effacement of his friend Selwyn. He began to comprehend the curious economies practiced, the continued absence from club and coterie, the choice of the sordid lodging whither Boots, one night, seeing him on the street by chance, had shamelessly tracked him with no excuse for the intrusion save his affection for this man, and his secret doubts of the man's ability to take care of himself and his occult affairs. Now he was going there. Exactly what to do he did not yet know, but with the vague determination to do something. On the wet pavements and reeking iron overhead structure along 6th Avenue, the street lights glimmered, lending to the filthy avenue under its rusty tunnel a mystery almost picturesque. Into it he turned, swung aboard a car as it shot groaning and clanking around the curve from 59th Street, and settled down to brood and ponder and consider until it was time for him to swing off the car into the slimy street once more. Silvery pools of light inlaid the dim expanse of Washington Square. He turned east, then south, then east again, and doubled into a dim street, where old-time houses with toppling dormers crowded huddling together, as though in the cowering contact there was safety from the destroyer who must one day come, bringing steel girders and cement to mark their graves with skyscraping monuments of stone. Into the doorway of one of these houses Lansing turned. When the town was young, a Lansing had lived there in pomp and circumstance. His own great-grandfather Rand, he smiled grimly, amused at the irony of things terrestrial. A slattern at the door halted him. Nobody ain't let up them stairs without my knowin' why, she mumbled. I want to see Captain Selwyn, he explained. Hey? Captain Selwyn. Hey, I am a little deef, screeched the old crone. Is it Captain Selwyn you want? Above, Selwyn, hearing his name screamed through the shadows of the ancient house, came to the stairwell and looked down into the blackness. What is it, Mrs. Glodden? He said sharply, then catching sight of a dim figure springing up the stairs. Here, this way, is it for me? And as Boots came into the light from his open door, oh, he whispered, deadly pale under the reaction, I thought it was a telegram. Come in. Boots shook the snow from his hat and coat into the passageway and took the single chair. Selwyn, tall and gaunt in his shabby dressing gown, stood looking at him and plucking nervously at the frayed and tasseled cord around his waist. I do not know how you came to stumble in here, he said at length, but I am glad to see you. Thanks, replied Boots, gazing shamelessly and inquisitively about. There was nothing to see except a few books, a pipe or two, toilet articles, and a shaky gas jet. The flat military trunk was under the iron bed. It's not much of a place, observed Selwyn, forcing a smile. However, you see, I am so seldom in town. I am busy at the hook, so I do not require anything elaborate. Yes, I know, said Boots solemnly. A silence. Have a pipe? Inquired Selwyn uneasily. He had nothing else to offer. Boots leaned back in his stiff chair, crossed his legs, and filled a pipe. When he had lighted it, he said, How are things, Phil? All right, first rate, thank you. Boots removed the pipe from his lips and swore at him, and Selwyn listened with head obstinately lowered and lean hands plucking at his frayed girdle. And when Boots had ended his observations with an emphatic question, Selwyn shook his head. No, Boots, you're very good to ask me to stop with you, but I cannot. I would be hampered. There are matters affairs that concern Meth that need instant attention at times at certain times. I must be free to go, free to come. I could not be in your house. Do not ask me. But I might thank you for offering. Phil, what? Are you broke? Aha, little with a smile. Will you take what you require from me? No. Oh, very well, I was horribly afraid you would. Selwyn laughed and leaned back, indenting his meager pillow. Come, Boots, he said, you and I have often had worse quarters than this. To tell you the truth, I rather like it than otherwise. Oh, damn, said Boots, disgusted. The same old conscience and the same old mule, who likes squalidity? I do not, you do not. What if fate has hit you a nasty swipe? Suppose fortune has landed you a few in the slats. It's only temporary and you know it. All business in the world is conducted on borrowed capital. It's your business to live in decent quarters, and I am here to lend you the means of conducting that business. Oh, come on, Phil, for heaven's sake. If there were really any logical reason for this genius in the garret business, I would not say a word. But there is not. You are going to make money. Oh, yes, I have got to, said Selwyn simply. Well, then, in the meanwhile. No, listen, Boots, I could not be free in your house. If there are telegrams and expected once at all hours. What of it? You do not understand. Wait a bit, how do you know I do not? Do the telegrams come from Sandy Hook? No. Boots looked him calmly in the eye. Then I do understand, old man. Come on out of this in heaven's name. Come now, get your dressing gown off and your coat on. Do not you think I understand? I tell you I do. Yes, the whole blessed, illogical, chivalrous business. Never mind how I know, for I will not tell you. Oh, I am not trying to interfere with you. I know enough to shun buzzsaws. All I want is for you to come and take that big back room and help a fellow live in a lonely house, help a man to make it cheerful. I cannot stand it alone any longer, and it will be 4 years before Drina is 18. Drina, repeated Selwyn blankly, then he laughed. It was genuine laughter, too, and Boots grinned and puffed at his pipe and recrossed his legs, watching Selwyn out of eyes brightening with expectancy. Then it's settled, he said. What, your ultimate career with Drina? Oh, yes, that also, but I referred to your coming to live with me. Boots? Oh, Fizz, come on. I do not like the way you act, Phil. Selwyn said slowly, do you make it a personal matter? Yes, I do. Damn if I do not. You will be perfectly free there. I do not care what you do or where you go or what hours you keep. You can run up and down Broadway all night if you want to, or you can stop at home and play with the cats. I have 3 fine Wunsch made a cup of his hands and breathed into them, for the room was horribly cold, 3 fine tabbies, and a good fire for M to blink at when they start purring. He looked kindly but anxiously at Selwyn, waiting for a word, and as none came he said, Old fellow, you cannot fool me with your talk about needing nothing better because you are out of town all the time. You know what you and I used to talk about in the old days, sir, longing for a home and an open fire and a brace of cats and bedroom slippers. Now I have got 'em, and I make Ardwa signals at you. If your sheltertent got a fire or blew away, would not you crawl into mine? And are you going to turn down an old tent mate because his shack happens to be built of bricks? Do you put it that way? Yes, I do. Why, in heaven's name, do you want to stay in a vile hole like this unless you are smitten with Mrs. Glodden? Phil, I want you to come. Will you? Then I'll accept a corner of your blanket for a day or two, said Selwyn wearily. You will let me go when I want to. I will do more, I will make you go when I want you to. Come on, pay Mrs. Glodden and have your trunk sent. Selwyn forced a laugh, then sat up on the bed's edge and looked around at the unpapered walls. Bootsu will not say Toto anybody, what sort of a place I have been living in. No, but I will if you try to come back here. So Selwyn stood up and began to remove his dressing gown, and Lansing dragged out the little flat trunk and began to pack it. An hour later, they went away together through the falling snow. For a week Boots let him alone. He had a big, comfortable room, dressing closet, and bath adjoining the suite occupied by his host. He was absolutely free to go and come, and for a week or 10 days Boots scarcely laid eyes on him, except at breakfast, for Selwyn's visits to Sandy Hook became a daily routine, except when a telegram arrived from Edgewater calling him there. But matters at Edgewater were beginning to be easier in one way for him. Alikes appeared to forget him for days at a time. She was less irritable, less restless and exacting. A sweet-tempered and childish docility made the care of her a simpler matter for the nurses, and for him, her discontent had disappeared. She made fewer demands. She did ask for a sleigh to replace the phaeton, and Selwyn managed to get one for her. And Miss Casson, one of the nurses, wrote him how delighted Alikes had been, and how much good the sleighing was doing her. Yesterday, continued the nurse in her letter, there was a consultation here between doctors. Vale, Wesson, and Morrison as you requested. They have not changed their opinions, indeed. They are convinced that there is no possible chance of the recovery you hoped for when you talked with Dr. Morrison. They all agree that Mrs. Ruthven is in excellent physical condition, young, strong, vigorous, and may live for years, may outlive us all. But there is nothing else to expect. The letter ran on. I am enclosing the bills you desired to have sent you. Fuel is very expensive, as you will see. The items for fruits, too, seems unreasonably large, but grapes are $2 a pound and fresh vegetables dreadfully expensive. Mrs. Ruthven is comfortable and happy in the luxury provided. She is very sweet and docile with us, Alland. We are careful not to irritate her, or to have anything intrude which might excite or cause the slightest shock to her. Yesterday, standing at the window, she caught sight of a passing Negro, and she turned to me like a flash and said, "The 10th Cavalry were there." She seemed rather excited for a moment, not unpleasantly, but when I ventured to ask her a question, she had quite forgotten it all. I meant to thank you for sending me the revolver and cartridges. It seemed a silly request, but we are in a rather lonely place, and I think Miss Bond and I feel a little safer knowing that, in case of necessity, we have something to frighten away any roaming intruder who might take it into his head to visit us. One thing we must be careful about. Yesterday, Mrs. Ruthven had a doll on my bed, and I sat sewing by the window, not noticing what she was doing until I heard her pretty, pathetic little laugh. And what do you think she had done? She had discovered your revolver under my pillow, and she had tied her handkerchief around it, and was using it as a doll. I got it away with a little persuasion, but at times she still asks for her army doll, saying that a boy she knew, named Philip, had sent it to her from Manila, where he was living. This, Captain Selwyn, is all the news. I do not think she will begin to fret for you again for some time. At first, you remember, it was every other day, then every 3 or 4 days. It has now been a week since she asked for you. When she does, I will, as usual, telegraph you. With many thanks for your kindness to us all, very respectfully yours, Mary Casson. Selwyn read this letter sitting before the fire in the living room, feet on the fender, pipe between his teeth. It was the first day of absolute rest he had had in a long while. The day before he had been at the Hook until almost dark, watching the firing of a big gun, and the results had been so satisfactory that he was venturing to give himself a holiday unless wanted at Edgewater. But the morning had brought this letter. Alikes was contented and comfortable. So when Boots, after breakfast, went off to his airline office, Selwyn permitted himself the luxury of smoking jacket and slippers, and settled down before the fire to reread the letter and examine the enclosed bills, and ponder and worry over them at his ease. To have leisure to worry over perplexities was something. To worry in such luxury as this seemed something so very near to happiness that, as he refolded the last bill for household expenses, he smiled faintly to himself. Boots's 3 tabby-cats were disposed comfortably before the blaze, 4 paws folded under, purring and blinking lazily at the grate. All around were evidences of Boots's personal taste in pretty wallpaper and hangings, a few handsome Shiraz rugs underfoot, deep, comfortable chairs, low, open bookcases full of promising literature, more promising, because not contemporary. Selwyn loved such a room as this where all was comfort, and nothing in the quiet, but cheerful, ensemble disturbed the peaceful homeliness. Onseemed not very long since had persuaded himself that there had been a chance for him to have such a home and live in it not alone. That chance had never really existed, he knew now. For sooner or later he must have awakened from the pleasant dreams of self-persuasion to the reality of his relentless responsibility. No, there had never been such a chance. And he thanked God that he had learned before it was too late that for him there could be no earthly paradise, no fireside adieu, no home, no hope of it. As long as Alikes lived, his spiritual responsibility must endure, and they had just told him that she might easily outlive them all. He turned heavily in his chair and stared at the fire. Perhaps he saw infernal visions in the flames. Perhaps the blaze meant nothing more to him than an example of chemical reaction, for his face was set and colorless and vacant, and his hands lay loosely along the padded arms of his easy-chair. The hardest lesson he had to learn in these days was to avoid thinking. Or, if he must surrender to the throbbing, unbidden memories which came crowding in hordes to carry him by the suddenness of their assault, that he learned to curb and subdue and direct them in pity toward that hopeless, helpless, stricken creature who was so utterly dependent upon him in her dreadful isolation. And he could not so direct them. Loyal in act and deed, his thoughts betrayed him. Memories insurgent turned on him to stab him, and he shrank from them, cowering among his pillows at midnight. But memory is merciless, and what has been is without pity, and so remembrance rose at midnight from its cerements like a specter, floating before his covered eyes, wearing the shape of youth and love, crowned with the splendor of her hair, looking at him out of those clear, sweet eyes whose gaze was purity and truth eternal. And truth is truth, though he might lie with hands clenched across his brow to shut out the wraith of it that haunted him, though he might set his course by the faith that was in him, and put away the hope of the world whose hope is love, the truth was there, staring at him out of Eileen Errol's dark blue eyes. He had seen her seldom that winter. When he had seen her, their relations appeared to be as happy, as friendly as before. There was no apparent constraint, nothing from her to indicate that she noticed an absence for which his continual business with the government seemed sufficient excuse. Besides, her days were full days, consequent upon Nina's goading and indefatigable activity, and Eileen danced and received, and she bridged and lunched, and she heard opera Wednesdays and was good to the poor on Fridays, and there were balls and theaters and classes for intellectual improvement, and routine duties incident to obligations borne with those inhabitants of Manhattan, who are numbered among the 1,000 caryatides that support upon their jeweled necks and naked shoulders the social structure of the metropolis. But Selwyn, unable longer to fulfill his social obligations, was being quietly eliminated from the social scheme of things. Passed over here, dropped there, counted out as one more man not to be depended upon, it was not a question of loss of caste. He simply stayed away, and his absence was accepted by people who, in the breathless pleasure chase, have no leisure to inquire why a man has lagged behind. There were rumors, however, that he had merely temporarily donned overalls for the purpose of making a gigantic fortune, and many an envious young fellow asked his pretty partner in the dance if it was true, and many a young girl frankly hoped it was, and that the fortune would be quick in the making. For Selwyn was well liked in the younger set, and that he was in process of becoming eligible interested everybody except Gladys and the Minster twins, who considered him sufficiently eligible without the material additions required by their cynical seniors, and would rather have had him penniless and present than absent and opulent. But they were young and foolish, and after a while they forgot to miss him, particularly Gladys, whose mother had asked her not to dance quite so often with Gerald, and to favor him a trifle less frequently in Codolin, which prevoyance had been coped with successfully by Nina, who, noticing it, at first took merely a perverse pleasure in foiling Mrs. Orkle, But afterward, as the affair became noticeable, animated by the instinct of the truly clever opportunist, she gave Gerald every fighting chance. Whatever came of it, and, no doubt, the Oracles had more ambitious views for Gladys. It was well to have Gerald mentioned in such a fashionable episode, whether anything came of it or not. Gerald, in the early days of his affair with Gladys, and before even it had assumed the proportions of an affair, had shyly come to Selwyn, not for confession, but with the crafty purpose of introducing her name into the conversation, so that he might have the luxury of talking about her to somebody who would neither quiz him nor suspect him. Selwyn, of course, ultimately suspected him, but as he never quizzed him, Gerald continued his elaborate system of subterfuges to make her personality and doings a topic for him to expand upon and Selwyn to listen to. It had amused Selwyn. He thought of it no a gay memory like a ray of light flung for a moment across the somber background of his own sadness. Fortunate or unfortunate, Gerald was still lucky in his freedom to hazard it with chance and fate. Freedom to love, that alone was blessed, though that love be unreturned. Without that right, the right to love a man was no man. Lansing had been correct. Such a man was a specter in a living world, the ghost of what he had been. But there was no help for it, and their Lansing had been in the wrong. No hope, no help, nothing for it but to set a true course and hang to it. And Selwyn's dull eyes rested upon the ashes of the fire, and he saw his dead youth among them, and, in the flames, his maturity burning to embers. If he outlived Alikes, his life would lie as the ashes lay at his feet. If she outlived him, and they had told him there was every chance of it, at least, he would have something to busy himself with in life, if he was to leave her provided for, when he was no longer there to stand between her and charity. That meant work, hard, incessant, blinding, stupefying work which stuns thought and makes such a life endurable. Not that he had ever desired death as a refuge or as a solution of despair. There was too much of the soldier in him. Besides, it is so impossible for youth to believe in death, to learn to apply the word to themselves. He had not learned to, and he had seen death and watched it, but for himself he had not learned to believe in it. When one turns 40, it is easier to credit it. Thinking of death impersonally, he sat watching the flames playing above the heavy log, and as he lay there in his chair, the unlighted pipe drooping in his hands, the telephone on the desk rang, and he rose and unhooked the receiver. Drina's voice sounded afar and, "Hello, sweetheart," he said gaily. "Is there anything I can do for your youthful highness?" "I have been talking over the phone to Boots," she said. "You know, whenever I have nothing to do I call up Boots at his office and talk to him." "That must please him," suggested Selwyn gravely. "It does. Boots says you are not going to business today, so I thought I would call you up." "Thank you," said Selwyn. "You are welcome. What are you doing over there in Boots's house?" "Looking at the fire, Drina, and listening to the purring of 3 fat tabby cats." "Oh, Mother and Eileen have gone somewhere. I have not anything to do for an hour. Cannot you come around?" "Why, yes, if you want me." "Yes, I do. Of course I cannot have Boots and I prefer you next. The children are fox hunting and it bores me. Will you come?" "Yes, when?" "Now, and would you mind bringing me a box of mint paste? Mother will not object. Besides, I will tell her anyway, after I have eaten them." "All right," said Selwyn, laughing and hanging up the receiver. On his way to the Gerards, he bought a box of the confection dear to Drina. But as he dropped the packet into his overcoat pocket, the memory of the past rose up suddenly, halting him. He could not bear to go to the house without some little gift for Eileen, and it was violets now as it was in the days that could never dawn again, a great, fragrant bunch of them, which he would leave for her after his brief play-hour with Drina was ended. The child was glad to see him, and expressed herself so, coming across to the chair where he sat and leaning against him, one arm on his shoulder. "Do you know," she said, "that I miss you ever so much? Do you know also that I am nearly 14, and that there is nobody in this house near enough my age to be very companionable? I have asked them to send me to school, and Mother is considering it." She leaned against his shoulder, curly head bent, thoughtfully studying the turquoise ring on her slim finger. It was her first ring. Nina had let Boots give it to her. "What a tall girl you are growing into," he said, encircling her waist with one arm. "Your mother was like you at 14. Did she ever tell you how she first met your father?" Well, I will tell you then. Your father was a schoolboy of 15, and one day he saw the most wonderful little girl riding a polo pony out of the park. Her mother was riding with her, and he lost his head and ran after her until she rode into the academy stables. And in he went headlong after her and found her dismounted and standing with her mother, and he took off his hat and he said to her mother, I have run quite a long way to tell you who I am. I am Colonel Gerard's son, Austin. Would you care to know me? And he looked at the little girl, who had curls precisely like yours, and the same little nose and mouth. And that little girl, who is now your mother, said very simply, Will not you come home to luncheon with us? May he, mother? He has run a very long way to be polite to us. And your mother's mother looked at the boy for a moment, smiling, for he was the image of his father, who had been at school with her. Then she said, Come to luncheon and tell me about your father. Your father once came 1,000 miles to see me, but I had started the day before on my wedding trip. And that is how your father first met your mother, when she was a little girl. Drina laughed. What a funny boy father was to run after a strange girl on a polo pony. Suppose he had not seen her and had not run after her. Where would I be now, Uncle Philip? Could you please tell me? Still aloft among the cherubim, sweetheart. But whose uncle would you be? And who would Boots have found for a comrade like me? It's a good thing that father ran after that polo pony. Probably God arranged it, do you think so? There is no harm in thinking it, he said, smiling. No, no harm. I have known for a long while that he was taking care of Boots for me until I grow up. Meanwhile, I know some very nice Harvard freshmen and 2 boys from St. Paul and 5 from Groton. That helps, you know. Helps what? Asked Selwyn, vastly amused. To pass the time until I am 18, said the child serenely, helping herself to another soft, pale green chunk of the aromatic paste. Uncle Philip, mother has forbidden me, and I will tell her, and take my punishment, but would you mind telling me how you first met my Analikes? Selwyn's arm around her relaxed, then tightened. Why do you ask, dear? He said very quietly. Because I was just wondering whether God arranged that too. Selwyn looked at her a moment. Yes, he said grimly, nothing happens by chance. Then, when God arranges such things, he does not always consider our happiness. He gives us our chance, Drina. Oh, did you have a chance? I heard mother say to Eileen that you had never had a chance for happiness. I thought it was very sad. I had gone into the clothes press to play with my dolls, you know, I still do play with them, that is. I go into some secret place and look at them at times when the children are not around. So I was in there, sitting on the sedarchist, and I could not help hearing what they said. She extracted another bonbon, bit into it, and shook her head. And mother said to Eileen, Dearest, cannot you learn to care for him? And Eileen. Drina, he interrupted sharply, you must not repeat things you overhear. Oh, I did not hear anything more, said the child, because I remembered that I should not listen, and I came out of the closet. Mother was standing by the bed, and Eileen was lying on the bed with her hands over her eyes, and I did not know she had been crying until I said, Please excuse me for listening, and she sat up very quickly, and I saw her face was flushed and her eyes wet. Is not it possible for you to marry anybody, Uncle Philip? No, Drina. Not even if Eileen would marry you. No. Why? You could not understand, dear. Even your mother cannot quite understand, so we will not ever speak of it again, Drina. The child balanced a bonbon between thumb and forefinger, considering it very gravely. I know something that mother does not, she said, and as he betrayed no curiosity. Eileen is in love, I heard her say so. He straightened up sharply, turning to look at her. I was sleeping with her. I was still awake, and I heard her say, I do love you, I do love you. She said it very softly, and I cuddled up, supposing she meant me. But she was asleep. She certainly meant you, said Selwyn, forcing his stiffened lips into a smile. The child shook her head, looking down at the ring which she was turning on her finger. No, she did not mean me. How do you know? Because she said a man's name. The silence lengthened. He sat, tilted a little forward, blank gaze focused on the snowy window. Drina, standing, leaned back into the hollow of his arm, absently studying her ring. A few moments later, her music teacher arrived, and Drina was obliged to leave him. If you do not wait until I have finished my music, she said, you will not see Mother and Eileen. They are coming to take me to the riding school at 4 o'clock. He said that he could not stay that day, and when she had gone away to the schoolroom, he walked slowly to the window and looked out across the snowy park, where hundreds of children were floundering about with gaily painted sleds. It was a pretty scene in the sunshine. Crimson sweaters and toboggan caps made vivid spots of color on the white expanse. Beyond, through the naked trees, he could see the drive, and the sleighs with their brilliant scarlet plumes and running gear flashing in the sun. Overhead was the splendid winter blue of the New York sky, in which, at a vast height, seabirds circled. Meaning to goffer the house and its associations made him restless, picked up the box of violets, and turned to ring for a maid to take charge of Themend, found himself confronting Eileen, who, in her furs and gloves, was just entering the room. I came up, she said. They told me you were here, calling very formally upon Drina, if you please. What with her monopoly of you and Boots, there seems to be no chance for Nina and me. They shook hands pleasantly. He offered her the box of violets, and she thanked him and opened it, and, lifting the heavy, perfumed bunch, bent her fresh young face to it. For a moment she stood inhaling the scent, then stretched out her arm, offering their fragrance to him. The first night I ever knew you, you sent me about a wagon load of violets, she said carelessly. He nodded pleasantly. She tossed her muff on to the library table, stripped off her gloves, and began to unhook her fur coat, declining his aid with a quick shake of her head. It is easy, you see, as the sleeves slid from her arms and the soft mass of fur fell into a chair. And, by the way, Drina said that you could not wait to see Nina, she continued, turning to face a mirror and beginning to withdraw the jeweled pins from her hat, so you will not for a moment consider it necessary to remain just because I wandered and will you. He made no reply. She was still busy with her veil and hat and her bright, glossy hair, the ends of which curled up at the templess a burnished frame for her cheeks which the cold had delicately flushed to a wildrose tint. Then, brushing back the upcurled tendrils of her hair, she turned to confront him, faintly smiling, brows lifted in silent repetition of her question. I will stay until Nina comes, if I may, he said slowly. She seated herself. You may, she said mockingly. We do not allow you in the house very often, so when you do come you may remain until the entire family can congregate to inspect you. She leaned back, looking at him, then look and manner changed, and she bent impulsively forward. You do not look very well, Captain Selwyn, are you? Perfectly, I laughed. I am growing old, that is all. Do you say that to annoy me? She asked with a disdainful shrug, or to further impress me. He shook his head and touched the hair at his temples significantly. Pooh, she retorted. It is becoming, is that what you mean? I hope it is. There's no reason why a man should not grow old gracefully. Captain Selwyn, but of course you only say it to bring out that latent temper of mine. It's about the only thing that does it, too. And please do not plague me if you have only a few moments to stay. It may amuse you to know that I, too, am exhibiting signs of increasing infirmity. My temper, if you please, is not what it once was. Worse than ever, he asked in pretended astonishment. Far worse, it is vicious. Kit Kai took a nap on a new dinner gown of mine, and I slapped her. And the other day Drina hid in a clothes press while Nina was discussing my private affairs, and when the little imp emerged I could have shaken her. Oh, I am certainly becoming infirm, so if you are too, comfort yourself with the knowledge that I am keeping pace with you through the winter of our discontent. At the mention of the incident of which Drina had already spoken to him, Selwyn raised his head and looked at the girl curiously. Then he laughed. I am wondering, he said in a bantering voice, what secrets Drina heard. I think I would better ask her. You had better not, besides, I said nothing at all. But Nina 999. She nodded, lying there, arms raised, hands clasping the upholstered wings of the big chair, and gazing at him out of indolent, amused eyes. Would you like to know what Nina was saying to me? She asked. I would rather hear what you said to her. I told you that I said nothing. Not a word, he insisted. Not a word. Not even a sound. And well, I will not answer that. Oh ho, he laughed, so you did make some sort of inarticulate reply. Were you laughing or weeping? Perhaps I was yawning, how do you know? She smiled. After a moment he said, still curious, why were you crying, Eileen? Crying? I did not say I was crying. I assume it. To prove or disprove that assumption, she said coolly, amused, let us hunt up a motive for a possible display of tears. What, Captain Selwyn, have I to cry about? Is there anything in the world that I lack, anything that I desire and cannot have? Is there? He repeated. I asked you, Captain Selwyn. And, unable to reply, he said, I ask you. And I, she retorted, refused to answer. Oh ho, so there is then something you lack? There is a motive for possible tears. You have not proven it, she said. You have not denied it. She tipped back her head, linked her fingers under her chin, and looked at him across the smooth curve of her cheeks. Wellies, she admitted, I was crying if you insist on knowing. Now that you have so cleverly driven me to admit that, can you also force me to tell you why I was so tearful? Certainly, he said promptly. It was something Nina said that made you cry. They both laughed. Oh, what a come down, she said teasingly. You knew that before. But can you force me to confess to you what Nina was saying? If you can, you are the cleverest cross-examiner in the world, for I would rather perish than tell you. Oh, he said instantly, then it was something about love. He had not meant to say it. He had spoken too quickly, and the flush of surprise on the girl's face was matched by the color rising to his own temples. And, to retrieve the situation, he spoke too quickly and too lightly. A girl would rather perish than admit that she is in love? He said, forcing a laugh. That is rather a clever deduction, I think. Unfortunately, however, I happen to know to the contrary, so all my cleverness comes to nothing. The surprise had faded from her face, but the color remained, and with it something else, something in the blue eyes which he had never before encountered their faintest trace of recoil, of shrinking away from him. And she herself did not know it was there, did not quite realize that she had been hurt. Surprised that he had chanced so abruptly, so unerringly upon the truth had startled and confused her, but that he had made free of the truth so lightly, so carelessly, laughingly amused, left her without an answering smile. That it had been an accident, a chance surmise, which perhaps he himself did not credit, which he could not believe, made it no easier for her. For the first time in his life, he had said something which left her unresponsive, with a sense of bruised delicacy and of privacy invaded. A tinge of fear of him crept in, too. She did not misconstrue what he had said under privilege of a jest. But after what had once passed between them, she had not considered that love, even in the abstract, might serve as a mocking text for any humor or jesting sermon from a man who had asked her what he once asked the man she had loved enough to weep for when she had refused him, only because she lacked what he asked for. Knowing that she loved him in her own innocent fashion, scarcely credulous that he ever could be dearer to her, yet shyly wistful for whatever more the years might add to her knowledge of a love so far immune from stress or doubt or the mounting thrill of a deeper emotion, she had remained confidently passive, warmly loyal, reverencing the mystery of the love he offered, though she could not understand it or respond. And no a chance turn, of a word a trend to an idle train of thought, jestingly followed, and, without warning, they had stumbled on a treasured memory, too frail, too delicately fragile to endure the shock. And now fear crept in, fear that he had forgotten, had changed. Else how could he have spoken so? And the tempered restraint of her quivered at the thought, all the serenity, the confidence in life and in him began to waver. And her first doubt crept in upon her. She turned her expressionless face from him, and, resting her cheek against the velvet back of the chair, looked out into the late afternoon sunshine. All the long autumn without him, all her long, lonely leisure hours in the golden weather, his silence, his withdrawal into himself, and his work, hitherto she had not misconstrued, though often she confused herself in explaining it. Impatience of his absence, too, had stimulated her to understand the temporary state of things, to know that time away from him meant for her only existence in suspense. Very, very slowly, by degrees imperceptible, alone with memories of him and of their summer's happiness already behind her, she had learned that time added things to what she had once considered her full capacity for affection. alone with her memories of him, at odd moments during the day, often in the gay clamor and crush of the social Rutner driving with Nina, or lying, wittied on her pillow at night. She became conscious that time, little by little, very gradually but very surely, was adding to her regard for him frail, new, elusive elements that stole in to awake an unquiet pulse or stir her heart into a sudden thrill, leaving it fluttering, and a faint glow gradually spreading through her every vein. She was beginning to love him no longer in her own sweet fashion, but in his, and she was vaguely aware of it, yet curiously passive and content to put no question to herself whether it was true or false. And how it might be with him she evaded asking herself, too. Only the quickening of breath and pulse questioned the pure thoughts unvoiced. Only the increasing impatience of her suspense confirmed the answer which now, perhaps, she might give him one day while the blessed world was young. At the thought she moved uneasily, shifting her position in the chair. Sunset and the swift winter twilight had tinted, then dimmed, the light in the room. On the oak-beamed ceiling, across the ivory rosettes, a single bar of red sunlight lay, broken by rafter and plaster foliation. She watched it turn to rose, to ashes, and closing her eyes, she lay very still and motionless in the gray shadows closing over all. He had not yet spoken when again she lifted her eyes and saw him sitting in the dusk, one arm resting across his knee, his body bent slightly forward, his gaze vacant. Into himself again, silently companioned by the shadows of old thoughts, far from her further than he had ever been. For a while she lay there, watching him, scarcely breathing, then a faint shiver of utter loneliness came over Hieroph's desire for his attention, his voice, his friendship, and the expression of it. But he never moved, his eyes seemed dull and unseeing, his face strangely gaunt to her, unfamiliar, hard. In the dim light he seemed but the ghost of what she had known, of what she had thought him a phantom, growing vaguer, more unreal, slipping away from her through the fading light. And the impulse to arouse herself and him from the dim danger, to arrest the spell, to break it, and seize what was their own in life overwhelmed her. And she sat up, grasping the great arms of her chair, slender, straight, white-faced in the gloom. But he did not stir. Then unreasoning, instinctive fear confused her, and she heard her own voice, sounding strangely in the twilight. "What has come between us, Captain Selwyn? What has happened to us? Something is all wrong, and I ask you what it is because I do not know. Tell me." He had lifted his head at her first word, hesitatingly, as though dazed. "Could you tell me?" she asked faintly. "Tell you what, child? Why you are so silent with me? What has crept in between us? I, the innocent courage sustaining her eye, have not changed except a little in the way you wished. Have you?" "No," he said in an altered voice. "Then what is it? I have been, you have left me so much alone this winter, and I supposed I understood." "My work," he said, but she scarcely knew the voice for his. "I know you have had no time. I know that. I ought to know it by this time, for I have told myself often enough. And yet when we are together, it has been different. Can you tell me why? Do you think me changed?" "You must not change," he said. "No," she breathed, wondering. "I could no accept a little, as I told you." "You must not change, not even that way," he repeated in a voice so low she could scarcely hear him and believed she had misunderstood him. "I did not hear you," she said faintly. "What did you say to me?" "I cannot say it again." She slowly shook her head, not comprehending, and for a while sat silent, struggling with her own thoughts. Then, suddenly instinct with the subtle fear which had driven her into speech. "When I said that to you last summer, when I cried in the swinging seat there, because I could not answer you as I wished, taughted that change you, Captain Selwyn." "No." "Then you are unchanged." "Yes, Eileen." The first thrill of deep emotion struck through and through her. Then that is not it," she faltered. "I was afraid, I have sometimes wondered if it was. I am very glad, Captain Selwyn. Will you wait a little longer for me, Toto Chain?" He stood up suddenly in the darkness, and she sprang to her feet, breathless, for she had caught the low exclamation and the strange sound that stifled it in his throat. "Tell me," she stammered, "W what has happened. Do not turn away to the window. Do not leave me all alone to endure this. That is something I have known was drawing you away, I do not know where. What is it? Could you not tell me, Captain Selwyn? I have been very frank with you. I have been truthful and loyal. I gave you, from the moment I knew you, all of me there was to give. And if there is more to give, no, it was yours when it came to me. Do you think I am too young to know what I am saying? Solitude is a teacher. I am still a scholar, perhaps, but I think that you could teach me what my drill master, Solitude, could not. If it is true you love me. The mounting sea of passion swept him. He turned on her unsteadily, his hands clenched, not daring to touch her. Shame, contrition, horror that the damage was already done, all were forgotten. Only the deadly grim duty of the moment held him back. Dear, he said, because I am unchanged because I love you so help me, and God help us both. Tell me, she said steadily, but it was fear that stilled her voice. She laid one slim hand on the table, bearing down on the points of her fingers until the nails whitened, but her head was high and her eyes met his, straight, unwavering. I knew it, she said. I understood there was something. If it is troubling, I see it, bring it to me. If I am the woman you took me for, give me my part in this. It is the quickest way to my heart, Captain Selwyn. But he had grown afraid, horribly afraid. All the cowardice in him was in the ascendant. But that passed. Watching his worn face, she saw it passing. Fear clutched at her. For the first time in her life, she desired to go to him, hold fast to him, seeking in contact the reassurance of his strength. But she only stood straighter, a little paler, already half divining in the clairvoyance of her young soul what lay still hidden. Do you ask a part in this? He said at last. I ask it. Why? Her eyes wavered, then returned his gaze. For love of you, she said, as white as death. He caught his breath sharply and straightened out, passing one hand across his eyes. When she saw his face again in the dim light, it was ghastly. There was a woman, he said, for whom I was once responsible. He spoke wearily, head bent, resting the weight of one arm on the table against which she leaned. Do you understand? He asked. Yes, you mean Mrs. Ruthven. I mean her. Afterward, when matters had altered, I came home. He raised his head and looked about him in the darkness. Came home, he repeated, no longer a man. The shadow of a man with no hope, no outlook, no right to hope. He leaned heavily on the table, his arm rigid, looking down at the floor as he spoke. No right to hope. Others told me that I still possessed that right. I knew they were wrong. I do not mean that they persuaded me, I persuaded myself that, after all, perhaps my right to hope remained to me. I persuaded myself that I might be, after all, the substance, not the shadow. He looked up at her. And so I dared to love you. She gazed at him, scarcely breathing. Then, he said, came the awakening. My dream had ended. She waited, the lace on her breast scarce stirring, so still she stood, so pitifully still. Such responsibility cannot die while those live who undertook it. I believed it until I desired to believe it no longer. But a man's self-persuasion cannot alter such laws, nor can human laws confirm or nullify them, nor can a great religion do more than admit their truth, basing its creed upon such laws. No man can put asunder, no laws of man undo the burden. And, to my shame and disgrace, I have had to relearn this after offering you a love I had no right to offer, a life which is not my own to give. He took one step toward her, and his voice fell so low that she could just hear him. She has lost her mind, and the case is hopeless. Those to whom the laws of the land have given care of her turned on her, threatened her with disgrace. And when one friend of hers halted this miserable conspiracy, her malady came swiftly upon her, and suddenly she found herself helpless, penniless, abandoned, her mind already clouded and clouding faster. Eileen, was there then the shadow of a doubt as to the responsibility? Because a man's son was named in the parable, does the lesson end thereand? Are there no others as prodigal, no other bonds that hold as inexorably as the bond of love? Mina lawyer or to referee decided to remove a burden, but a higher court has replaced it. He came and stood directly before her. I dare not utter one word of love to you, I dare not touch you. What chance is there for such a man as I? No chance for us, she whispered, go. For a second he stood motionless, then, swaying slightly, turned on his heel. And long after he had left the house she still stood there, eyes closed, colorless lips set, her slender body quivering, racked with the first fierce grief of a woman's love for a man. Chapter 12. Her Way. Neargard had already begun to make mistakes. The first was in thinking that, among those whose only distinction was their wealth, his own wealth permitted him the same insolence and ruthlessness that so frequently characterized them. Clever, vindictively patient, circumspect, and commercially competent as he had been, his intelligence was not of a high order. The intelligent never willfully make enemies. Neargard made them gratuitously, cynically kicking from under him the props he used in mounting the breach, and which he fancied he no longer needed as a scaffolding now that he had obtained a foothold on the outer wall. Thus he had sneeringly dispensed with Gerald. Thus he had shouldered Fane and Harmon out of his way when they objected to the purchase of Neargard's acreage adjoining the Sowitha Preserve, and its incorporation as an integral portion of the club tract. Thus he was preparing to rid himself of Ruthven for another reason. But he was not yet quite ready to spurn Ruthven, because he wanted a little more out of him, just enough to place himself on a secure footing among those of the younger set where Ruthven, as hack Codelin leader, was regarded by the young with wittied awe. Why Neargard, who had forced himself into the Sowitha, ever came to commit so gross a blunder as to dragoon, or even permit, the club to acquire the acreage, the exploiting of which had threatened their existence, is not very clear. Once within the club, he may have supposed himself perpetually safe, not only because of his hold on Ruthven, but also because, back of his unflagging persistence, back of his determination to shoulder and push deep into the gilded, perfumed crush where purse strings and morals were loosened with every heave and twist in the panting struggle around the raw gold altar back of the sordid past, back of all the resentment, and the sinister memory of wrongs and grievances, still unbalanced, lay an enormous vanity. It was the vanity in Heimven in the bitter days that throbbed with the agony of the bright world's insolence. It was vanity which sustained him in better days, where he sat nursing in his crooked mind the crooked thoughts that swarmed there. His desire for position and power was that, even his yearning for corruption was but the desire for the satiation of a vanity as monstrous as it was passionless. His to have what was shared by those he envied, the power to pick and choose, to ignore, to punish. His to receive, not to seek, to dispense, not to stand waiting for his portion. His the freedom of the forbidden, of everything beyond him, of all withheld, denied by this bright, looser-robed, wantoned goddess from whose invisible altar he had caught a whiff of sacrificial odors, standing there through the wintry years in the squalor and reek of things. Now he had arrived among those outlying camps where camp followers and masters mingled. Certain cardrooms were open to him, certain drawing rooms, certain clubs. Through them he shouldered, thrilled as he advanced deeper into the throng, fired with the contact of the crush around him. Already the familiarity of his appearance and his name seemed to sanction his presence. 2 minor clubs, but good once in need of douchad, strained at the social camel and swallowed him. Cardrooms welcomed him not, the rooms once flung open contemptuously for his plucking, but rooms where play was fiercer, and where those who faced him expected battle to the limit. And they got it, for he no longer felt obliged to lose, and that again was a mistake. He could not yet afford to win. Thick in the chance and circumstance of the outer camp, heavily involved financially, and already a crushing financial force, meshed in, or spinning in his turn the strands and counter-strands of intrigue, with a dozen men already mortally offended, and a woman or two alarmed or half contemptuously on guard, flattered. Covetous or afraid, the limit of Neargard's intelligence was reached. His present horizon ended the world for him because he could not imagine anything beyond it, and that smirking vanity which had squired him so far, hat in hand, now plucked off its mask and leered boldly about in the wake of its close-eyed master. George Fane, unpleasantly involved in block copper, angry, but not very much frightened, turned in casual good faith to Neargard to ease matters until he could cover. And Neargard locked him in the tighter and shouldered his way through Rosamund's drawing room to the sill of Sankson Orkel's outer office, treading brutally on Harmon's heels. Harmon in disgust, wrath, and fear went to Craig, Craig to Maxwell Hunt. Hunt wired Motley. Motley, cold and sleek in his contempt, came from Palm Beach. The cohesive power of caste is an unknown element to the outsider. That he had unwittingly and prematurely aroused some unsuspected force on which he had not counted, and of which he had no definite knowledge, was revealed to Neargard, when he desired Rosamund to obtain for him an invitation to the Orkel's ball. It appeared that she could not do so, that even the threatened tendency of block copper could not sharpen her wits to devise a way for him. Very innocently, she told him that Jack Ruthven was leading the Chinese cotillion, with Mrs. Delmer Carnes from one end, Gerald Errol, with Gladys from the other, a hint that a card ought to be easy enough to obtain in spite of the strangely forgetful Orkles. Long since he had fixed upon Gladys Orkle as the most suitable silent partner for the unbuilt house of Neargard, unconcerned that rumor was already sending her abroad for the double purpose of getting rid of Gerald and of giving deserving aristocracy a look-in at the fresh youth of her and her selling price. Nothing so far had checked his progress. Why should rumor? Elbow and money had shoved him on, shoulder deep where his thin nose pointed, crowding aside and out of his way whatever was made to be crowded out, and going around, hat off, whatever remained arrogantly immovable. So he had come, on various occasions, close to the unruffled skirts of this young girl, not yet, however, in her own house. But Sankson Orkle had recently condescended to turn around in his office chair and leave his amusing railroad combinations long enough to divide with Neargard 250,000 copper profits, and there was another turn to be expected when Neargard gave the word. Therefore, it puzzled and confused Neargard to be overlooked, where the gay world had been summoned with an accompanying blast from the public press. Therefore he had gone to Rosamund with the curtest of hints. But he had remained, standing before her, checked, not condescending to irritation, but mentally alert to a new element of resistance which he had not expected, a new force, palpable, unlooked for, unclassified as yet in his schedule for his life's itinerary. That force was the cohesive power of abstract caste in the presence of a foreign irritant threatening its atomic disintegration. That foreign and irritating substance was himself. But he had forgotten in his vanity that which in his rower shrewdness he should have remembered. Eternal vigilance was the price, not the cancelled vouchers of the servitude of dead years and the half-servile challenge of the strange new days when his vanity had dared him to live. Rosamund, smoothly groomed, golden-headed and smiling, rose as Neargard moved slowly forward to take his leave. "So stupid of them to have overlooked you," she said, "and I should have thought Gladys would have remembered unless—" His close-set eyes focused so near her own that she stopped, involuntarily occupied with the unusual phenomenon. "Unless what?" he asked. She was all laughing polished surface again. "Unless Gladys's intellect, which has only room for one idea at a time, is already fully occupied." "With what?" he demanded. "Oh, with that Gerald boy," she shrugged indulgently, perhaps with her pretty American grace and the outlook for the insular invasion. Neargard's apple face was dull and mottled, and on the thin bridge of his nose the sweat glistened. He did not know what she meant, and she knew he did not. As he turned to go, she paced him a step or two across the rose and gold reception room, hands linked behind her back, bending forward slightly as she moved beside him. "Gerald, poor lad, is to be disciplined," she observed. "The prettiest of American duchesses takes her over next spring, and heaven knows the household cavalry needs green forage. Besides, even Jack Ruthven may stand the chance they say he stands if it is true he has made up his mind to sue for his divorce." Neargard wheeled on her. The sweat on his nose had become a bright bead. "Where did you hear that?" he asked. "What about Jack Ruthven?" Her smooth shoulders fluttered her answer. "You mean it's talked about?" he insisted. "In some sets," she said with an indifference which coolly excluded the probability that he could have been in any position to hear what was discussed in those sets. Again he felt the check of something intangible but real, and the vanity in him, flicked on the raw, peered out at her from his close-set eyes. For a moment he measured her from the edge of her skirt to her golden head, insolently. "You might remind your husband," he said, "that I would rather like to have a card to the Orkle affair." "There is no use in speaking to George," she replied regretfully, shaking her head. "Try it," returned Neargard with the hint of a snarl, and he took his leave, and his hat from the man in waiting, who looked after him with the slightest twitching of his shaven upper lip. For the lifting of an eyebrow in the drawing-rooms becomes warrant for a tip that runs very swiftly below stairs. That afternoon, alone in his office, Neargard remembered Gerald, and for the first time he understood the mistake of making an enemy out of what he had known only as a friendly fool. But it was a detail, after all merely a slight error in assuming too early an arrogance he could have afforded to wait for. He had waited a long, long while for some things. As for Fane, he had him locked up with his short account. No doubt he would hear from the oracles through the Fanes. However, to clinch the matter, he thought he might as well stop in to see Ruthven. A plain word or two to Ruthven indicating his own wishes perhaps, outlining his policy concerning the future house of Neargard might as well be delivered now as later. So that afternoon he took a hansom at Broad and Wall Streets and rolled smoothly uptown, not seriously concerned, but willing to have a brief understanding with Ruthven on one or two subjects. As his cab drove up to the intricately ornamental little house of gray stone, a big touring limousine wheeled out from the curb, and he caught sight of Sankson, Orkel, and Phoenix motley inside, evidently just leaving Ruthven. His smiling and very cordial bow was returned coolly by Orkel, and apparently not observed at all by Motley. He sat a second in his cab, motionless, the obsequious smile still stenciled on his flushed face. Then the flush darkened. He got out of his cab and, bidding the man wait, rang at the house of Ruthven. Admitted, it was a long while before he was asked to mount the carved stairway of stone. And when he did, on every step, hand on the bronze rail, he had the same curious sense of occult resistance to his physical progress. The same instinct of a new element, arising into the scheme of things, the properties of which he felt a sudden fierce desire to test and comprehend. Ruthven, in a lounging suit of lilac silk, sashed in with flexible silver, stood with his back to the door as Neargard was announced. And even after he was announced, Ruthven took his time to turn and stare and nod with a deliberate negligence that accented the affront. Neargard sat down. Ruthven gazed out of the window, then, soft thumbs hooked in his sash, turned leisurely in impudent interrogation. "What the hell is the matter with you?" asked Neargard, for the subtle something he had been encountering all day had suddenly seemed to wall him out of all he had conquered, forcing him back into the simpler sordid territory, where ways and modes of speech were more familiar to him, where the spontaneous crudity of expression belonged among the husks of all he had supposed discarded forever. "Really," observed Ruthven, staring at the seated man, "I scarcely understand your remark." "Well, you will understand it perhaps when I choose to explain it," said Neargard. "I see there's some trouble somewhere. What is it? What's the matter with Orkel and that hatchet-faced beagle pup Motley? Is there anything the matter, Jack?" "Nothing important," said Ruthven with an intonation which troubled Neargard. "Did you come here to ask anything of me? Very glad to do anything, I am sure." "Are you? Well then, I want a card to the Orkels." Ruthven raised his brows slightly, and Neargard waited, then repeated his demand. Ruthven began to explain, rather languidly, that it was impossible, but I want it, insisted the other doggedly. "I cannot be of any service to you in this instance." "Oh yes, I think you can. I tell you I want that card. Do you understand plain speech?" "Yas," drawled Ruthven, seating himself a trifle wearily among his cushions, "but yours is so very plank white elemental, you know. You ask for a bid to the Orkels. I tell you quite seriously I cannot secure one for you." "You would better think it over," said Neargard menacingly. "Awfully sorry." "You means you will not?" "Ah, quite so." Neargard's thin nose grew white and tremulous. "Why?" "You insist," in mildly bored deprecation. "Yes, I insist. Why cannot you, or why will not you?" "Well, if you really insist, Thea don't want you, Neargard." How do you happen to know that they do not? Is this some petty spite of that young cub, Gerald? Or and he almost looked at Ruthven, is this some childish whim of yours? "Oh, really now?" "Yes, really now," sneered Neargard, "you would better tell me. And you would better understand now once for all, just exactly what I have outlined for myself. You can steer clear of the territory I operate in." He clasped his blunt fingers and leaned forward, projecting his whole body, thick legs curled under, but his close-set eyes still looked past Ruthven. "I need a little backing," he said, "but I can get along without it. And what I am going to do is to marry Miss Orkel. Now you know, now you understand. I do not care a damn about the Errol boy, and I think I will discount right now any intentions of any married man to bother Miss Orkel after some Dakota decree, frees him from the woman whom he's driven into an asylum. Ruthven looked at him curiously. So that is discounted, is it? I think so, nodded Neargard. I do not think that man will try to obtain a divorce until I say the word. Oh, why not? Because of my knowledge concerning that man's crooked methods in obtaining for me certain options that meant ruin to his own country club, said Neargard coolly. I see how extraordinary, but the club has bought in all that land, has not it? Yes, but the stench of your treachery remains, my friend. Not treachery, only temptation, observed Ruthven blandly. I have talked it all over with Orkel and Motley. Yowat, gasped Neargard. Talked about it, repeated Ruthven, hard-faced, guileless, and raising his eyebrows a dreadful caricature of youth in the misleading smoothness of the minutely shaven face. I told Orkel what you persuaded me to do. Yow, you damned. Not at all, not at all, protested Ruthven, languidly settling himself once more among the cushions. And by the way, he added, there's a lobula something or other that I understand may interest Yao, looked up at Neargard, who had sunk back in his chair about unpaid assessments. Neargard now, for the first time, was looking directly at him. Unpaid assessments, repeated Ruthven. It's a detail a law never enforced unless we find it convenient to rid ourselves of a member. It's rather useful, you see, in such a casea technical pretext, you know. I forget the exact phrasing, something about ceases to retain his membership, and such shares of stock as he may own in the said club shall be appraised and delivered to the treasurer upon receipt of the value or something like that. Still Neargard looked at him, hunched up in his chair, chin sunk on his chest. Thought it just as well to mention it, said Ruthven blandly, as they have seen fit to take advantage of the opportunity under legal advice. You will hear from the secretary, I fancy Motley, you know. Is there anything more, Neargard? Neargard scarcely heard him. He had listened mechanically, when told in as many words that he had been read out of the Sewitha Club. He understood that he stood alone, discarded, disgraced, with a certain small coterie of wealthy men implacably hostile to him. But it was not that which occupied him. He was face to face with the new element of which he had known nothing, the subtle, occult resistance to himself and his personality, all that he represented, embodied, stood for, hoped for. And for the first time he realized that among the ruthless, no ruthlessness was permitted him. Among the reckless, circumspection had been required of him. No arrogance, no insolence had been permitted him among the arrogant and insolent. For, when such as he turned threateningly upon one of those belonging to that elemental matrix of which he dared suppose himself an integral part, he found that he was mistaken. Danger to one from such as he endangered their common caste to such as it was. And silently, subtly, all through that portion of the social fabric, he became slowly sensible of resistance or resistance everywhere, from every quarter. Now, hunched up there in his chair, he began to understand. If Ruthven had been a blackguard, it was not for him to punish him, no, not even threaten to expose him. His own caste would take care of that, his own sort would manage such affairs. Meanwhile, Neargard had presumed to annoy them, and the society into which he had forced himself, and which he had digestively affected, was now, squid-like, slowly turning itself inside out to expel him as a foreign substance from which such unimportant nutrition as he had afforded had been completely extracted. He looked at Ruthven, scarcely seeing him. Finally, he gathered his thick legs under to support him as he rose, stupidly, looking about for his hat. Ruthven rang for a servant. When he came, Neargard followed him without a word, small eyes vacant, the moisture powdering the ridge of his nose, his red blunt hands dangling as he walked. Behind him, a lackey laughed. In due time, Neargard, who still spent his penny on a morning paper, read about the Orkel ball. There were 3 columns and several pictures. He read all there was to read about sickeningly minute details of jewels and costumes, the sorts of stuff served at supper, the cotilin, the favors. Then, turning back, he read about the dozen-odd separate hostesses who had entertained the various coteries and sets at separate dinners before the ball, read every item, every name, to the last imbecile period. Then he rose wearily and started downtown to see what his lawyers could do toward reinstating him in a club that had expelled him, to find out if there remained the slightest trace of a chance in the matter. But even as he went, he knew there could be none. The squid had had its will with him, not he with the squid, And within him rose again all the old hatred and fear of these people from whom he had desired to extract full payment for the black days of need he had endured, for the want, the squalor, the starvation he had passed through. But the reckoning left him, where he had started save for the money they had used, when he forced it on them not thanking him. So he went to his lawyers every day for a while, then every week then, toward the end of winter, less often, for he had less time now, and there was a new pressure which he was beginning to feel vaguely hostile to him in his business enterprises in the negotiations of loans, delays, perhaps accidental, but annoying, changes of policy in certain firms who no longer cared to consider acreage as investment, and a curiously veiled antagonism to him in a certain railroad, the reorganization of which he had dared once to aspire to. And one day, sitting alone in his office, a clerk brought him a morning paper with one column marked in a big blue-penciled oval. It was only about a boy and a girl who had run away and married because they happened to be in love, although their parents had prepared other plans for their separate disposal. The column was a full one, the heading in big type a good deal of pother about a boy and a girl, after all, particularly as it appeared that their respective families had determined to make the best of it. Besides, the girl's parents had other daughters growing up, and the prettiest of American duchesses would no doubt remain amiable. As for the household cavalry, probably some of them were badly in need of forage, but that thin red line could hold out until the younger sisters shed pinafores. So after all, in spite of double leads in the full column, the runaways could continue their impromptu honeymoon without fear of parents, duchess, or a rescue charge from that thin, red, and impecunious line. It took Neargard all day to read that column before he folded it away and pigeonholed it among a lot of dusty documents and collected claims, a memorandum of a deal with Ruthven, a note from an actress, and the papers in his case against the Sowitha Club which would never come to a soothe knew it no never amount to anything. So among these archives of dead desires, dead hopes, and a vengeance deferred sine die, he laid away the soiled newspaper. Then he went home, very tired with a mental lassitude that depressed him, and left him drowsy in his great armchair before the gratitude drowsy and apathetic to examine the letters and documents laid out for him by his secretary. Although one of them seemed to be important something about alienation of affections, something about a yacht and Mrs. Ruthven, and a heavy suit to be brought unless other settlement was suggested as a balm to Mr. Ruthven. To dress for dinner was an effort of purely mechanical operation, which was only partly successful, although his man aided him. But he was too tired to continue the effort, and at last it was his man alone who disembarrassed him of his heavy clothing and who laid him among the bedclothes, where he sank back, relaxed, breathing loudly in the dreadful depressed stupor of utter physical and neurotic prostration. Meaningless to him, the hurriedly intrusive a Tornishi's own and Ruthven's who forced their way in that night or was it the next, or months later? A weight like the weight of death lay on him, mind and body. If he comprehended what threatened, what was coming, he did not care. The world passed on, leaving him lying there, nerveless, exhausted, a derelict on a sea too stormy for such as he wreck that might have sailed safely in narrower waters. And some day he would be patched up and set afloat once more to cruise and operate, and have his being in the safer and smaller seas. Some day, when the nerve crash had subsided, and the slow, wounded mind came back to itself, and its petty functions were once more resumed its envious scheming, its covetous capability, its vicious achievement. For with him achievement could embody only the meaner imitations of the sheer colossal coups, by which the great financiers gutted a nation with kid-loved fingers, and changed their gloves after the operation, so that no blood might stick to Peter's pence or smear the cornerstones of those vast and shadowy institutions, upreared in restitution black silhouettes against the infernal sunset of lives that end in the shadowy death of souls. Even before Neargard's illness, Ruthven's domestic and financial affairs were in a villainous mess. Rid of Neargard, he had meant to deal him a crashing blow at the breakaway, which would settle him for ever and incidentally bring to a crisis his own status in regard to his wife. Whether or not his wife was mentally competent, he did not know. He did not know anything about her. But he meant to. Selwyn's threat, still fairly fresh in his memory, had given him no definite idea of Alik's, her whereabouts, her future plans, and whether or not her mental condition was supposed to be permanently impaired or otherwise. That she had been, and probably now was, under Selwyn's protection he believed. What she and Selwyn intended to do he did not know. But he wanted to know. He dared not ask Selwyn dared not because he was horribly afraid of Selwyn, dared not yet make a legal issue of their relations, of her sequestration, or of her probable continued infirmity, because of his physical fear of the man. But there Wasser he thought that there had been on way to begin the matter, because the matter must sooner or later be begun, and that was to pretend to assume Neergard responsible, and, on the strength of his wife's summer sojourn aboard the Niobrara, turn on Neergard and demand a reckoning which he believed Selwyn would never hear of because he did not suppose Neergard dared defend the suit, and would sooner or later compromise, which would give him what he wanted to begin with, money, and the entering wedge against the wife he meant to be rid of in one way or another, even if he had to swear out a warrant against Selwyn before he demanded a commission to investigate her mental condition. Ruthven was too deadly afraid of Selwyn to begin suit at that stage of the proceedings. All he could do was to start, through his attorneys, a search for his wife, and meanwhile try to formulate some sort of definite plan in regard to Gladys Orkle. For if that feather-brained youngster went abroad in the spring, he meant to follow her and not only have the Atlantic between him and Selwyn when he began final suit for freedom, but also be in a position to ride off any of the needy household cavalry who might come caracoling and cavorting too close to the young girl he had selected to rehabilitate the name, fortune, and house of Ruthven. This, in brief, was Ruthven's general scheme of campaign, and the entire affair had taken some sort of shape and was slowly beginning to move when Neergard's illness came as an absolute check, just as the first papers were about to be served on him. There was nothing to do but wait until Neergard got well, because his attorneys simply scoffed at any suggestion of settlement ex curia, and Ruthven did not want a suit involving his wife's name while he and Selwyn were in the same hemisphere. But he could still continue an unobtrusive search for the whereabouts of his wife, which he 999, and the chances were that his attorneys would find her without great difficulty, because Selwyn had not the slightest suspicion that he was being followed. In these days, Selwyn's life was methodical and colorless in its routine, to the verge of dreariness. When he was not at the government proving grounds on Sandy Hook, he remained in his room at Lansing's, doggedly forcing himself into the only alternate occupation sufficient to dull the sadness of his mind, the preparation of a history of British military organization in India, and its possible application to present conditions in the Philippines. He had given up going out, made no further pretense, and Boots let him alone. Once a week he called at the Gerards, spending most of his time while there with the children. Sometimes he saw Nina and Eileen, usually just returned or about to depart for some function, and his visit, as a rule, ended with a cup of tea alone with Austin and a quiet cigar in the library, where Kit Kai sat, paws folded under, approving of the fireside warmth in a pleasurable monotone. On such evenings, late, if Nina and Eileen had gone to a dance, or to the opera with Boots, Austin, ruddy with well-being and shamelessly slippered, stretched luxuriously in the fire warmth, lazily discussing what was nearest to Himhai's children and wife, and the material comfort which continued to attend him with the blessing of that heaven which seems so largely occupied in fulfilling the desires of the good for their own commercial prosperity. 2. He had begun to show a peculiar pride in the commercial development of Gerald, speaking often of his gratifying application to business, the stability of his modest position, the friends he was making among men of substance, their regard for him. Not that the boy is doing much of a business yet, he would say with a tolerant shrug of his big fleshy shoulders, but he's laying the foundation for success, a good, upright, solid foundation with the doubtful scheming of Neergard left out at that time. Neergard had not yet gone to pieces, physically, and I expect to aid him when aid is required, and to extend to him judiciously such assistance from time to time as I think he may require. There's one thing. Austin puffed once or twice at his cigar and frowned, and Selwyn, absently watching the dying embers on the hearth, waited in silence. One thing, repeated Austin, reaching for the tongs and laying a log of white birch across the coals, and that is Gerald's fondness for pretty girls. Not that it is not all right, too, but I hope he is not going to involve himself hang a millstone around his neck before he can see his way clear to some promise of a permanent income based on. Pooh, said Selwyn. What's that? Demanded Austin, turning red. Selwyn laughed. What did you have when you married my sister? Austin, still red and dignified, said, your sister is a very remarkable woman, extremely unusual. I had the good sense to see that the first time I ever met her. Gerald will see the same thing when his time comes, said Selwyn quietly. Do not worry, Austin, he's sound at the core. Austin considered his cigarette, turning it round and round. There's good stock in the boy. I always knew Ivan when he acted like a yellow pup. You see, Phil, that my treatment of him was the proper treatment. I was right in refusing to mollycoddle him or put up with any of his callow, unbaked impudence. You know yourself that you wanted me to let up on him, make all kinds of excuses. Why, man, if I had given him an inch leeway, he would have been up to his ears in debt. But I was firm. He saw I would stand no fooling. He did not dare contract debts which he could not pay. So now, Phil, you can appreciate the results of my attitude toward him. I can, indeed, said Selwyn thoughtfully. I think I have made a man of him, persisted Austin. He's certainly a manly fellow, nodded Selwyn. You admit it. Certainly, Austin. Well, I am glad of it. You thought me harsho, I know you did, but I do not blame you. I knew what I was about. Why, Phil, if I had not taken the firm stand I took, that boy would have been running to Nina, and Eileen did go to his sister once, but he never dared try it again, and he would probably have borrowed money of Neargard and Bejove. He might even have come to you to get him out of his scrapes. Oh, scarcely that, protested Selwyn with grave humor. That's all you know about it, nodded Austin, whistled, smoking steadily. And all I have to say is that it's fortunate for everybody that I stood my ground when he came around looking for trouble. For you are just the sort of a man, Phil, who would be likely to strip yourself if that young cub came howling for somebody to pay his debts of honor. Admit it now, you know you are. But Selwyn only smiled and looked into the fire. After a few moments' silence, Austin said curiously, you are a frugal bird. You used to be fastidious. Do you know that coat of yours is nearly the limit? Nonsense, said Selwyn, coloring. It is. What do you do with your money? Invest it, of course, but you ought to let me place it. You never spend any. You should have a decent little sum tucked away by this time. Do your chaosite experiments cost anything now? No, the government is conducting them. Good business. What does the Bali government think of the powder now? I cannot tell yet, said Selwyn listlessly. There's a plate due to arrive tomorrow. It represents a section of the side armor of one of the new 22,000-ton battleships. I hope to crack it. Oh, with a bursting charge. Selwyn nodded and rested his head on his hand. A little later, Austin cast the remains of his cigar from him, straightened up, yawned, patted his waistcoat, and looked wisely at the cat. I'm going to bed, he announced. Boots is to bring back Nina and Eileen. You do not mind, do you, Phil? I have a busy day tomorrow. There's scotch over there, you know where things are. Ring if you have a sudden desire for anything funny like peacock feathers on toast. There's cold grouse somewhere underground if you are going to be an owl. And do not feed that cat on the rugs. Good night. Good night, nodded Selwyn, relighting his cigar. He had no intention of remaining very long. He supposed that his sister and Eileen would be out late, wherever they were, and he merely meant to dream a bit longer before going back to bed. He had been smoking for half an hour perhaps, lying deep in his chair, worn features dully illuminated by the sinking fire. And he was thinking about going, had again relighted his partly consumed cigar to help him with its fragrant companionship on his dark route homeward, when he heard a footfall on the landing, and turned to catch a glimpse of Gerald in overcoat and hat, moving silently toward the stairs. Hello, old fellow, he said, surprised. I did not know you were in the house. The boy hesitated, turned, placed something just outside the doorway, and came quickly into the room. Philip, he said with a curious, excited laugh, I want to ask you something. I never yet came to you without asking something, and you never have failed me. Would you tell me now what I had better do? Certainly, said Selwyn, surprised and smiling. Ask me, old fellow. You are not eloping with some nice girl, are you? Yes, said Gerald, calm in his excitement. I am. What? Repeated Selwyn gravely. What did you say? You guessed it. I came home and dressed, and I am going back to the Craigs to marry a girl whose mother and father will not let me have her. Sit down, Gerald, said Selwyn, removing the cigar from his lips. But I have not time, said the boy. I simply want to know what you would do if you loved a girl whose mother means to send her to London to get rid of me and marry her to that yawning Elliscombe fellow who was over here. What would you do? She's too young to stand much of a siege in London. Some Englishman will get her, if he persists, and I mean to make her love me. Oh, does not she? Yes, you know how young girls are. Yes, she does know. But a year or two with that crowd and the Duchess being good to her, and Elliscombe yawning and looking like a sleepy Lohengrin or some damned prince in his horse guard's helmet, Selwyn, I can see the end of it. She cannot stand it, she's too young not to get over it. So, what would you do? Who is she, Gerald? I will not tell you. Oh, of course she's the right sort. Perfectly. Young. Very out last season. Selwyn rose and began to pace the floor. Kit Kai, disturbed, looked up, then resumed her purring. There's nothing dishonorable in this, of course, said Selwyn, halting short. No, said the boy. I went to her mother and asked for her and was sent about my business. Then I went to her father. You know him. He was decent, bland, evasive, but decent. Said his daughter needed a couple of seasons in London, hinted of some prior attachment, which is rot because she loves Mesh admits it. Well, I said to him, I am going to marry Gladys, and he laughed and tried to look at his mustache, and after a while he asked to be excused. I took the count. Then I saw Gladys at the Craigs, and I said, Gladys, if you will give up the whole blooming heiress business and come with me, I will make you the happiest girl in Manhattan. And she looked me straight in the eyes and said, I would rather grow up with you than grow old forgetting you. Did she say that? Asked Selwyn. She said, we have the greatest chance in the world, Gerald, to make something of each other. Is it a good risk? And I said, it is the best risk in the world if you love me. And she said, I do dearly, I will take my chance. And that's how it stands, Philip. She's at the Craigs' suitcase and traveling gown upstairs. Suddy Gray and Betty Craig are standing for it, and with a flush there's a little church, you know. Around the corner, I know, did you telephone? Yes. There was a pause. The older man dropped his hands into his pockets and stepped quietly in front of Gerald, and for a full minute they looked squarely at one another, unwinking. Well, asked Gerald almost tremulously, cannot you say go ahead? Do not ask me. No, I will not, said the boy simply. A man does not ask about such matters, he does them. Tell Austin and Nina, and give this note to Eileen. He opened a portfolio and laid an envelope in Selwyn's hands. And be George, I almost forgot. Here, and he laid a check across the note in Selwyn's hand. Here's the balance of what you have advanced me. Thank God, I have made it good, every cent, but the debt is only the deeper. Goodbye, Philip. Selwyn held the boy's hand a moment. Once or twice Gerald thought he meant to speak, and waited, but when he became aware of the check thrust back at him, he forced it on Selwyn again, laughing. No, no. If I did not stand clear and free in my shoes, do you think I would dare do what I am doing? Do you suppose I would ask a girl to face with me a world in which I owed a penny? Do you suppose I am afraid of that world, or of a soul in it? Do you suppose I cannot take a living out of it? Suddenly, Selwyn crushed the boy's hand. Then take it, and her too, he said between his teeth, and turned on his heel, resting his arms on the mantel and his head face downward between them. So Gerald went away in the pride and excitement of buoyant youth to take love as he found it. And where he found it, though, he had found it only as the green bud of promise which unfolds, not to the lover, but to love. And the boy was only one of many on whom the victory might have fallen. But such a man becomes the only man when he takes what he finds for himself green bud, half blown, or open to its own deep fragrant heart. To him that hath shall be given, and much forgiven. For it is the law of the strong and the prophets, and a little should be left to that destiny, which the devout revere under a gentler name. The affair made a splash in the social puddle, and the commotion spread outside of it. Inside, the Ninning 70 cackled, outside similar gallinaceous sounds. Nearguard pored all day over the blue-penciled column, and went home, stunned. The social sheet which is taken below stairs and read above was full of it, as was the daily press, and the mouths of people interested, uninterested, and disinterested, legitimately or otherwise, until people began to tire of telling each other exactly how it happened that Gerald Errol ran away with Gladys Orkle. Sankson Orkle was widely quoted as suavely and urbanely deploring the premature consummation of an alliance long since decided upon by both families involved. Mrs. Oracle snapped her electric blue eyes and held her peace between her very white teeth. Austin Gerard, secretly astounded with admiration for Gerald, received the reporters with a countenance expressive of patient pain, but downtown he made public pretense of busy indifference, as though not fully alive to the material benefit connected with the unexpected alliance. Nina wept the pilly at moments, she laughed because she had heard all about the famous British invasion planned by the Orcles and abetted by Anglo-American aristocracy. She did not laugh too maliciously, she simply could not help it. Her set was not the Oracle's set, their ways were not her ways. Their orbits merely intersected occasionally, and left to herself and the choice hers, she would not have troubled herself to engineer any such alliance, even to stir up Mrs. Sankson Oracle. Besides, deep in her complacent little New York soul, she had the faintest germ of contempt for the Cordova ancestors of the House of Oracle. But the young and silly pair had now relieved her as well as Mrs. Oracle of any further trouble concerning themselves. The American Duchess, the campaign, and the Horse Guards. They had married each other rather shamelessly one evening while supposed to be dancing at the Sandon Craigs, and had departed expensively for Palm Beach, whither Austin, grim, reticent, but inwardly immensely contented, dispatched the accumulated exclamatory letters of the family with an intimation of his own that 2 weeks was long enough to cut business even with a honeymoon as excuse. Meanwhile, the disorganization in the nursery was tremendous. The children, vaguely aware of the household demoralization and excitement, took the opportunity to break loose on every occasion. And Kit Kai, to her infinite boredom and disgust, was hunted from garret to cellar. And Drina, taking advantage, contrived to overeat herself and sit up late and was put to bed sick. And Eileen, loyal, but sorrowfully amazed at her brother's exclusion of her in such a crisis, became slowly overwhelmed with the realization of her loneliness, and took to the seclusion of her own room, feeling tearful and abandoned, and very much like a very little girl whose heart was becoming far too full of all sorts of sorrows. Nina misunderstood her, finding her lying on her bed, her pale face pillowed in her hair. Only horridly ordinary people will believe that Gerald wanted her money, said Nina, as though an Errol considered such matters at Aller needed to. Clear, clean English you are, back to the cavaliers whose flung purses were their thanks when the Cordovans held their horses' heads. What are you crying for? I do not know, said Eileen, not for anything that you speak of. Neither Gerald nor I ever wasted any emotion over money or what others think about it. Is Drina ill? No, only sick. Calamo will fix her, but she believes she's close to dissolution and she's sent for Boots to take leave of him, little monkey. I am so indignant. She's taken advantage of the general demoralization to eat up everything in the house. Billy fell downstairs, fox hunting, and his nose bled all over that pink Kerman rug. Boots is a dear. Do you know what he's done? What? Asked Eileen listlessly, raising the back of her slender hand from her eyes to peer at Nina through the glimmer of tears. Well, he and Phil have moved out of Boots's house, and Boots has wired Gerald and Gladys that the house is ready for them until they can find a place of their own. Of course, they will both come here. In fact, their luggage is upstairs. Now Boots takes the blue room and Phil his old quarters. But do not you think it is perfectly sweet of Boots? And is not it good to have Philip back again? Yes, said Eileen faintly. Lying there, the deep azure of her eyes starred with tears, a new tremor altered her mouth, and the tight-curled upper lip quivered. Her heart, too, had begun its heavy, unsteady response in recognition of her lover's name. She turned partly away from Nina, burying her face in her brilliant hair, and beside her slim length, straight and tense, her arms lay, the small hands contracting till they had closed as tightly as her teeth. It was no child now, who lay there, fighting down the welling desolation, no visionary adolescent grieving over the colorless ashes of her first romance. Not even the woman, socially achieved, intelligently and intellectually in love. It was a girl, old enough to realize that the adoration she had given was not wholly spiritual, that her delight in her lover and her response to him was not wholly of the mind, not so purely of the intellect, that there was still more, something sweeter, more painful, more bewildering that she could give him, desired to give that she could not withhold even with sealed eyes and arms outstretched in the darkness of wakeful hours, with her young heart straining in her breast, and her set lips crushing back the unuttered cry. Love, so that was it. The need, the pain, the bewilderment, the hot sleeplessness, the mad audacity of a blessed dream, the flushed awakening. Stunned rapturine than the gray truth, bleaching the rose tints from the fading tapestries of slumberland, leaving her flung across her pillows, staring at daybreak. Nina had laid a cool, smooth hand across her forehead, pushing back the hair a light caress, sensitive as an unasked question. But there was no response, and presently the elder woman rose and went out along the landing, and Eileen heard her laughingly greeting Boots, who had arrived post-haste on news of Drina's plight. Do not be frightened. The little wretch carried tons of indigestible stuff to her room and sat up half the night eating it. Where's Philip? I do not know. Here's a special delivery for him. I signed for it and brought it from the house. He will be here from the hook directly, I fancy. Where is Drina? In bed, I will take you up. Mind you, there will be a scene, so nerve yourself. They went upstairs together. Nina knocked, peeped in, then summoned Mr. Lansing. Oh, Boots, Boots, groaned Drina, lifting her arms and encircling his neck. I do not think I am ever going to get well. I do not believe it, no matter what they say. I am glad you have come. I wanted you and I am very, very sick. Are you happy to be with me? Boots sat on the bedside, the feverish little head in his arms, and Nina was a trifle surprised to see how seriously he took it. Boots, she said, you look as though your last hour had come. Are you letting that very bad child frighten you? Drina, dear, mother does not mean to be horrid, but you are too old to whine. It's time for the medicine, too. Oh, mother, the nasty kind. Certainly, Boots, if you will move aside. Let Boots give it to me, exclaimed the child tragically. It will do no good, I am not getting better, but if I must take it, let Boots hold me the spoon. She sat straight up in bed with a superb gesture which would have done credit to that classical gentleman who heroically swallowed the hemlock cocktail. Some of the dose bespattered Boots, and when the deed was done, the child fell back and buried her head on his breast, incidentally leaving medicinal traces on his collar. Half an hour later she was asleep, holding fast to Boots's sleeve, and that young gentleman sat in a chair beside her, discussing with her pretty mother the plans made for Gladys and Gerald on their expected arrival. Eileen, pale and heavy-lidded, looked in on her way to some afternoon affair, nodding unsmiling at Boots. Have you been rifling the pantry too? He whispered. You lack your usual chromatic symphony. No, Boots, I am just tired. If I was not physically afraid of Drina, I would get you to run off with me anywhere. What is that letter, Nina, for me? It's for Phil. Boots brought it around. Leave it on the library table, dear, when you go down. Eileen took the letter and turned away. A few moments later, as she laid it on the library table, her eyes involuntarily noted the superscription written in the long, angular, fashionable writing of a woman. And slowly, the inevitable question took shape within her. How long she stood there she did not know, but the points of her gloved fingers were still resting on the table, and her gaze was still concentrated on the envelope when she felt Selwyn's presence in the room, near, close, and looked up into his steady eyes, and knew he loved her. And suddenly she broke down, for with his deep gaze in hers the overwrought specter had fled. Broke down, no longer doubting, bowing her head in her slim gloved hands, thrilled to the soul with the certitude of their unhappiness eternal, and the dreadful pleasure of her share. What is it? He made out to say, managing also to keep his hands off her where she sat, bowed and quivering by the table. And nothing, ah, little Chris over no nearly over. It was that letter Rother women writing you, and I outlawed tongue-tied. Do not look at me, do not wait. I am going out. He went to the window, stood a moment, came back to the table, took his letter and walked slowly again to the window. After a while he heard the rustle of her gown as she left the room, and a little later he straightened up, passed his hand across his tired eyes, and, looking down at the letter in his hand, broke the seal. It was from one of the nurses, Miss Casson, and shorter than usual. Mrs. Ruthven is physically in perfect health, but yesterday we noted a rather startling change in her mental condition. There were, during the day, intervals that seemed perfectly lucid. Once she spoke of Miss Bond as the other nurse, as though she realized something of the conditions surrounding her. Once, too, she seemed astonished when I brought her a doll and asked me, "Is there a child here, or is it for a charity bazaar?" Later I found her writing a letter at my desk. She left it unfinished when she went to dry via mere scrap. I thought it best to enclose it, which I do, herewith. The enclosure he opened. Phil, dear, though I have been very ill, I know you are my own husband. All the rest was only a child's dream of terror. And that was Allenly, this scrap, firmly written in the easy flowing hand he knew so well. He studied it for a moment or two, then resumed Miss Casson's letter. A man stopped our sleigh yesterday, asking if he was not speaking to Mrs. Ruthven. I was a trifle worried, and replied that any communication for Mrs. Ruthven could be sent to me. That evening 2 men gentlemen apparently came to the house and asked for me. I went down to receive them. One was a Dr. Mallison, the other said his name was Thomas B. Hallam, but gave no business address. When I found that they had come without your knowledge and authority, I refused to discuss Mrs. Ruthven's condition, and the one who said his name was Hallam spoke rather peremptorily, and in a way that made me think he might be a lawyer. They got nothing out of me, and they left when I made it plain that I had nothing to tell them. I thought it best to let you know about this, though I, personally, cannot guess what it might mean. Selwyn turned the page. One other matter worries Miss Bond and myself. The revolver you sent us at my request has disappeared. We are nearly sure Mrs. Ruthven has it. You know she once dressed it as a doll, calling it her army doll, but now we cannot find it. She has hidden it somewhere, out of doors in the shrubbery, we think, and Miss Bond and I expect to secure it the next time she takes a fancy to have all her dolls out for a lawn party. Dr. Wesson says there is no danger of her doing any harm with it, but wants us to secure it at the first opportunity. He turned the last page. On the other side was merely the formula of leave-taking and Miss Casson's signature. For a while he stood in the center of the room, head bent, narrowing eyes fixed. Then he folded the letter, pocketed it, and walked to the table where a directory lay. He found the name Hallam very easily. Thomas B. Hallam, lawyer, junior in the firm of Spencer, Boyd Hallam. They were attorneys for Jack Ruthven, he knew that. Mallison he also found Dr. James Mallison, who, it appeared, conducted some sort of private asylum on Long Island. And when he had found what he wanted, he went to the telephone and rang up Mr. Ruthven, but the servant who answered the telephone informed him that Mr. Ruthven was not in town. So Selwyn hung up the receiver and sat down, thoughtful, grim, the trace of a scowl creeping across his narrowing gray eyes. Of the abject cowardice of Ruthven, he had been so certain that he had hitherto discounted any interference from him. Yet now, the man was apparently preparing for some sort of interference. What did he want? Selwyn had contemptuously refused to permit him to seek a divorce on the ground of his wife's infirmity. What was the man after? The man was after his divorce. That was what it all meant. His first check on the long trail came with the stupefying news of Gerald's runaway marriage to the young girl. He was laying his own plans to marry some day in the future. And at first the news staggered him, leaving him apparently no immediate incentive for securing his freedom. But Ruthven instantly began to realize that what he had lost, he might not have lost had he been free to shoulder aside the young fellow who had forestalled him. The chance had passed, that particular chance. But he would never again allow himself to be caught in a position where such a chance could pass him by because he was not legally free to at least make the effort to seize it. Fear in his soul had kept him from blazoning his wife's infirmity to the world as cause for an action against her. But he remembered Nearguard's impudent cruise with her on the Niobrara, and he had temporarily settled on that as a means to extort revenue, not intending such an action should ever come to trial. And then he learned that Nearguard had gone to pieces. That was the second check. Ruthven needed money. He needed it because he meant to put the ocean between himself and Selwyn before commencing any suit, whatever ground he might choose for entering such a suit. He required capital on which to live abroad during the proceedings, if that could be legally arranged. And meanwhile, preliminary to any plan of campaign, he desired to know where his wife was and what might be her actual physical and mental condition. He had supposed her to be, or to have been, at least erratic and not to be trusted with her own freedom. Therefore he had been quite prepared to hear from those whom he employed to trace, and find her that she was housed in some institution devoted to the incarceration of such unfortunates. But Ruthven was totally unprepared, for the report brought him by a private agency to the effect that Mrs. Ruthven was apparently in perfect health, living in the country, maintaining a villa and staff of servants, that she might be seen driving a perfectly appointed Cossack sleigh any day with a groom on the rumble and a companion beside her, that she seemed to be perfectly sane, healthy in body and mind, comfortable, happy, and enjoying life under the protection of a certain Captain Selwyn, who paid all her bills and at certain times was seen entering or leaving her house at Edgewater. Excited, incredulous, but hoping for the worst, Ruthven had posted off to his attorneys. To them he naively confessed his desire to be rid of Alikes. He reported her misconduct with Nearguard, which he knew was a leher pretense of mental prostration, her disappearance, and his last interview with Selwyn in the cardroom. He also gave a vivid description of that gentleman's disgusting behavior and his threats of violence during that interview. To all of which his attorneys listened very attentively, bade him have no fear of his life, requested him to make several affidavits, and leave the rest to them for the present. Which he did, without hearing from them, until Mr. Hallam telegraphed him to come to Edgewater if he had nothing better to do. And Ruthven had just arrived at that inconspicuous Long Island village when his servant, at the telephone, replied to Selwyn's inquiry that his master was out of town. Mr. Hallam was a very busy, very sanguine, very impetuous young man, and when he met Ruthven at the Edgewater station, he told him promptly that he had the best case on earth, that he, Hallam, was going to New York on the next train, now almost due, and that Ruthven had better drive over and see for himself how gaily his wife maintained her household, for the Cossack sleigh, with its gay crimson tea-chug, had but just returned from the usual afternoon spin, and the young chatelaine of Willow Villa was now on the snow-covered lawn, romping with the coachman's huge white wolfhound. It might he just as well for Ruthven to stroll up that way and see for himself. The house was known as the Willow Villa. Any hackman could drive him past it. As Hallam was speaking, the New York train came thundering in, and the young lawyer, facing the snowy clouds of steam, swung his suitcase and himself aboard. On the Pullman platform he paused and looked around and down at Ruthven. "It's just as you like," he said. "If you would rather come back with me on this train, come ahead. It is not absolutely necessary that you make a personal inspection now. Only that fellow Selwyn is not here today, and I thought if you wanted to look about a bit you could do it this afternoon without chance of running into him and startling the whole mess boiling." "Is Captain Selwyn in town?" asked Ruthven, reddening. "Yes, an agency man telephoned me that he's just back from Sandy Hook." The train began to move out of the station. Ruthven hesitated, then stepped away from the passing car with a significant parting nod to Hallam. As the train, gathering momentum, swept past him, he stared about at the snow-covered station, the guard, the few people congregated there. "There's another train at 4, is not there?" he asked an official. 4:30 express, yes, sir." A hackman came up soliciting patronage. Ruthven motioned him to follow, leading the way to the edge of the platform. "I do not want to drive to the village. What have you got there, a sleigh?" It was the usual Long Island depot wagon, on runners instead of wheels. "Do you know the Willow Villa?" demanded Ruthven. "Willier Viller, sir? Yes, sir. Step right this way." "Wait," snapped Ruthven. "I asked you if you knew it. I did not say I wanted to go there." The hackman in his woolly greatcoat stared at the little dapper, smooth-shaven man, who eyed him in return, coolly insolent, lighting a cigar. "I do not want to go to the Willow Villa," said Ruthven. "I want you to drive me past it." "Sir?" "Past it and then turn around and drive back here. Is that plain?" "Yes, sir." Ruthven got into the closed body of the vehicle, rubbed the frost from the window, and peeked out. The hackman, unhitching his lank horse, climbed to the seat, gathered the reins, and the vehicle started to the jangling accompaniment of a single battered cowbell. The melancholy clamor of the bell annoyed little Mr. Ruthven. He was horribly cold, too, even in his fur coat. Also, the musty smell of the ancient vehicle annoyed him as he sat, half turned around, peeping out of the rear window into the white tree-lined road. There was nothing to see but the snowy road flanked by trees and stark hedges. Nothing but the flat expanse of white on either side, broken here and there by patches of thin woodlands, or by some old-time farmhouse with its slab shingles painted white and its green shutters and squat roof. What a god-forsaken place, muttered little Mr. Ruthven with a hard grimace. If she's happy in this sort of a hole, there's no doubt she's some sort of a lunatic. He looked out again furtively, thinking of what the agency had reported to him. How was it possible for any human creature to live in such a waste and be happy and healthy and gay, as they told him his wife was? What could a human being do to kill the horror of such silent, deathly white isolation? Drive about in it in a Cossack sleigh, as they said she did? Horror. The driver pulled up short, then began to turn his horse. Ruthven squinted out of the window but saw no sign of a villa. Then he rapped sharply on the forward window, motioning the driver to descend, come around, and open the door. When the man appeared, Ruthven demanded why he had turned his horse, and the hackman, pointing to a wooded hill to the west, explained that the willow villa stood there. Ruthven had supposed that the main road passed the house. He got out of the covered wagon, looked across at the low hill, and dug his gloved hands deeper into his fur-lined pockets. For a while he stood in the snow, stolid, thoughtful, puffing his cigar. A half-contemptuous curiosity possessed him to see his wife once more before he discarded her. See what she looked like, whether she appeared normal, and in possession of the small amount of sense he had condescended to credit her with. Besides, here was a safe chance to see her. Selwyn was in New York, and the absolute certainty of his personal safety attracted him strongly, rousing all the latent tyranny in his meager soul. Probably, but he did not understand the legal requirements of the matter, and whether or not it was necessary for him, personally, to see this place where Selwyn maintained her. And see her in it probably, he would be obliged to come here again, with far less certainty of personal security from Selwyn. Perhaps that future visit might even be avoided if he took this opportunity to investigate. Whether it was the half-sneering curiosity to see his wife, or the hope of doing a thing now which, by the doing, he need not do latter, whether it was either of these that moved him to the impulse, is not quite clear. He said to the hackman, "You wait here. I am going over to the Willow Villa for a few moments, and then I will want you to drive me back to the station in time for that 4:30. Do you understand?" The man said he understood, and Ruthven, bundled in his fur coat, picked his way across the crust, through a gateway, and up what appeared to be a hedged lane. The lane presently disclosed itself as an avenue, now doubly lined with tall trees. This avenue he continued to follow, passing through a grove of locusts, and came out before a house on the low crest of a hill. There were clumps of evergreens about, tall cedars, a bit of bushy foreland, and a stretch of snow. And across this open space of snow, a young girl was moving, followed by a white wolfhound. Once she paused, hesitated, looked cautiously around her. Ruthven, hiding behind a bush, saw her thrust her arm into a low evergreen shrub and draw out a shining object that glittered like glass. Then she started toward the house again. At first Ruthven thought she was his wife. Then he was not sure, and he cast his cigar away and followed, slinking forward among the evergreens. But the youthful fur-clad figure kept straight on to the veranda of the house, and Ruthven, curious and determined to find out whether it was a likes or not, left the semi-shelter of the evergreens and crossed the open space just as the woman's figure disappeared around an angle of the veranda. Vexed, determined not to return without some definite discovery, Ruthven stepped upon the veranda. Just around the angle of the porch, he heard a door opening, and he hurried forward, impatient and absolutely unafraid, anxious to get one good look at his wife and be off. But when he turned the angle of the porch, there was no one there. Only an open door confronted him, with a big, mild-eyed wolfhound standing in the doorway, looking steadily up at him. Ruthven glanced somewhat dubiously at the dog. Then, as the animal made no offensive movement, he craned his fleshy neck, striving to see inside the house. He did see nothing, very much only the same young girl, still in her furs, emerging from an inner room, her arms full of dolls. In his eagerness to see more, Ruthven pushed past the great white dog, who withdrew his head disdainfully from the unceremonious contact, but quietly followed Ruthven into the house, standing beside him, watching him out of great, limpid, deer-like eyes. But Ruthven no longer heeded the dog. His amused and slightly sneering gaze was fastened on the girl in furs who had entered what appeared to be a living room to the right, and now, down on her knees beside a couch, smiling and talking confidentially and quite happily to herself, was placing her dolls in a row against the wall. The dolls were of various sorts, some plainly enough homemade, some very waxy and gay in sash and lace, some with polished smiling features of porcelain. One doll, however, was different, a bit of ragged red flannel and something protruding to represent the head, something that glittered. And the girl in the fur jacket had this curious doll in her hands when Ruthven, to make sure of her identity, took a quick impulsive step forward. With the acrid smell of smoke choking her, then the great white dog growled, very low, and the girl in the fur jacket looked around and up quickly. Alikes, he realized it as she caught his pale eyes fixed on her, and she stared, sprang to her feet still staring. Then into her eyes leaped terror, the living horror of recognition distorting her face. And as she saw he meant to speak, she recoiled, shrinking away, turning in her fright like a hunted thing. The strange doll in her hand glittered. It was a revolver wrapped in a red rag. What's the matter? He stammered, stepping forward, fearful of the weapon she clutched. But at the sound of his voice, she screamed, crept back closer against the wall, screamed again, pushing the shining muzzle of the weapon deep into her fur jacket above her breast. For God's sake, he gasped, do not fire, do not. She closed both eyes and pulled the trigger. Something knocked her flat against the wall, but she heard no sound of a report, and she pulled the trigger again and felt another blow. The second blow must have knocked her down, for she found herself rising to her knees, reaching for the table to aid her. But her hand was all red and slippery. She looked at it stupidly, fell forward, rose again, with the acrid smell of smoke choking her, and her pretty fur jacket all soaked with the warm, wet stuff which now stained both hands. Then she got to her knees once more, groped in the rushing darkness, and swayed forward, falling loosely and flat. And this time she did not try to rise. It was her way. It had always been her way out of trouble. The quickest, easiest escape from what she did not choose to endure. And even when in her mind the light of reason had gone out forever, she had not lost that instinct for escape. And, wittingly or not, she had taken the old way out of trouble, the shortest, quickest way. And where it leads she knew at last, lying there on her face, her fur jacket and her little hands so soiled and red. As for the man, they finally contrived to drag the dog from him and lift him to the couch, where he lay twitching among the dolls for a while, then stopped twitching. Later in the night, men came with lanterns who carried him away. A doctor said that there was the usual chance for partial recovery, but it was the last excitement he could ever venture to indulge in. His own doctors had warned him often enough. Now he had learned something, but not as much as Alikes had already learned. And perhaps he never would, but no man knows such things with the authority to speak of them. Ars amoris. 9 days is the period of time allotted the human mind in which to wonder at anything. In New York, the limit is much less. No tragedy can hold the boards as long as that where the bill must be renewed 3 times a day to hold even the passing attention of those who themselves are eternal understudies in the continuous metropolitan performance. It is very expensive for the newspapers, but fortunately for them, there is always plenty of trouble in the 5 boroughs and an occasional catastrophe elsewhere to help out. So they were grateful enough that the Edgewater tragedy lasted them 48 hours, and on the 49th they forgot it. In society it was about the same. Ruthven was evidently done for, that the spark of mere vitality might linger for years in the exterior shell of him familiar to his world, concerned that world no more. Interest in him was laid aside with the perfunctory finality with which the memory of Alikes was laid away. As for Selwyn, a few people noticed his presence at the services, but even that episode was forgotten before he left the city. 6 hours later, under an invitation from Washington, which admitted of no delay on the score of private business or of personal perplexity. For the summons was peremptory, and his obedience so immediate that a telegram to Austin comprised and concluded the entire ceremony of his leave-taking. Later, he wrote a great many letters to Eileen Aronnaut, one of which he ever sent. But the formality of his silence was no mystery to her, and her response was silence as profound as the stillness in her soul. But deep into her young heart something new had been born, faint fire, latent, unstirred, and her delicate lips rested one on the other in the sensitive curve of suspense. And her white fingers, often now interlinked, seemed tremulously instinct with the exquisite tension hushing body and soul in breathless accord as they waited in unison. Toward the end of March, the Special Service Battleship Squadron of the North Atlantic Fleet commenced testing chaosite in the vicinity of the southern rendezvous. Both main and secondary batteries were employed. Selwyn had been aboard the flagship for nearly a month. In April, the armored ships left the southern drill ground and began to move northward. A destroyer took Selwyn across to the great fortress inside the Virginia Capes and left him there. During his stay, there was almost constant firing. Later, he continued northward as far as Washington, but it was not until June that he telegraphed Austin. Government satisfied, appropriation certain next session, am on my way to New York. Austin, in his house, which was now dismantled for the summer, telephoned Nina at Silverside that he had been detained and might not be able to grace the festivities which were to consist of a neighborhood dinner to the younger set in honor of Mrs. Gerald. But he said nothing about Selwyn, and Nina did not suspect that her brother's arrival in New York had anything to do with Austin's detention. There was in Austin a curious substreak of sentiment which seldom came to the surface, except where his immediate family was involved. In his dealings with others, he avoided it. Even with Gerald and Eileen, there had been little of this sentiment apparent. But where Selwyn was concerned, from the very first days of their friendship, he had always felt in his heart very close to the man whose sister he had married, and was always almost automatically on his guard to avoid any expression of that affection. Once he had done so, or attempted to, when Selwyn first arrived from the Philippines, and it made them both uncomfortable to the verge of profanity, but remained as a shy source of solace to them both. And now as Selwyn came leisurely up the front steps, Austin, awaiting him feverishly, hastened to smooth the florid jocose mask over his features, and walked into the room, big hand extended, large bantering voice undisturbed by the tremor of a welcome which filled his heart and came near filling his eyes. So you have stuck the poor old government at last, have you? Took 'em all in forts, fleet, and the marine cavalry. Sure thing, said Selwyn, laughing in the crushing grasp of the big fist. How are you, Austin? Everybody's in the country, I suppose, glancing around at the linen-shrouded furniture. How is Nina, and the kids? Good business, and Eileen. She's all right, said Austin. Gad, she's really a superb specimen this summer. You know she rather eased off last winter, get white around the gills and blue under the eyes. Some heart trouble, all thought it was you. Young girls have such notions sometimes, and I told Nina, but she sat on me. Where's your luggage? Oh, is it all here? Enough, I mean, for us to catch a train for Silverside this afternoon. Has Nina any room for me? Asked Selwyn. Room? Certainly. I did not tell her you were coming, because if you had not, the kids would have been horribly disappointed. She and Eileen are giving a shindy for Gladys, that's Gerald's new acquisition, you know, so if you do not mind butting into a baby show, we will run down. It's only the younger bunch from Hitherwood House and Brookminster. What do you say, Phil? Selwyn said that he would go hesitating before consenting. A curious feeling of age and grayness had suddenly come over him, a hint of fatigue, of consciousness that much of life lay behind him. Yet in his face and in his bearing he could not have shown much of it, though at his deeply sunburned temples the thick, close-cut hair was silvery. For Austin said with amused and at the same time fretful emphasis, "How the devil you keep the youth in your face and figure I do not understand. I am only 45 at that, scarcely 8 years older than you are. And look at my waistcoat, and look at my hair, I mean, where the confounded ebb has left the tide mark. Gad, I would scarcely blame Eileen for thinking you qualified for a cradle snatcher. And, by the way, that Gladys girl is more of a woman than you would believe. I observe that Gerald wears that peculiarly speaky Zipley's expression, which is a healthy sign that he's being managed right from the beginning." I had an idea she was all right, said Selwyn, smiling. Well, she is. People will probably say that she made Gerald. However, added Austin modestly, I shall never deny it, though you know what part one. V had in the making and breaking of him, do not you? Yes, replied Selwyn without a smile. Austin went to the telephone and called up his house at Silverside, saying that he would be down that evening with a guest. Nina got the message just as she had arranged her tables, but woman is born to sorrow and heiress to all the unlooked-for idiocies of man. Dear, she said to Eileen, the tears of uxorial vexation drying unshed in her pretty eyes, Austin has thought fit to seize upon this moment to bring a man down to dinner. So if you are dressed, would you kindly see that the tables are rearranged, and then telephone somebody to fill in 2 girls, you know? The oldest Craig girl might do for one. Beg her mother to let her come. Eileen was being laced, but she walked to the door of Nina's room, followed by her little Alsatian maid, who deftly continued her offices en route. "Whom is Austin bringing?" she asked. He did not say. "Cannot you think of a second girl to get? Is not it vexing? Of course there's nobody left, nobody ever fills in the country. Do you know I will be driven into letting Drina sit up with us, for sheer lack of material. I suppose the little imp will have a fit if I suggest it, and probably perish of indigestion tomorrow." Eileen laughed. "Oh, Nina, do let Drina come this once. It cannot hurt her, she'll look so quaint. The child's nearly 15, you know, do let me put up her hair. Boots will take her in." "Well, you and Austin can administer the calomel tomorrow, then. And do ring up Daisy Craig. Tell her mother I am desperate, and that she and Drina can occupy the same hospital tomorrow." And so it happened that among the jolly youthful throng which clustered around the little candle-lighted tables in the dining room at Silverside, Drina, in ecstasy, curly hair just above the nape of her slim white neck, and cheeks like pink fire, sat between Boots and a vacant chair reserved for her tardy father. For Nina had waited as long as she dared. Then Boots had been summoned to take in Drina and the youthful Craig girl, and, as there were to have been 6 at a table, at that particular table sat Boots decorously facing Eileen, with the 2 children on either hand and 2 empty chairs flanking Eileen. A jolly informality made up for Austin's shortcoming. Gerald and his pretty bride were the centers of delighted curiosity from the Minster twins, and the Innis girls and Evelyn Cardwell her intimates. And the younger Draymores, the Greys, Lawns, and Craigs were there in Forsigay, noisy, unembarrassed young people who seemed scarcely younger or gayer than the young matron, their hostess. As for Gladys, it was difficult to think of her as married, and to Boots Drina whispered blissfully, "I look almost as old, I know I do. After this I shall certainly make no end of a fuss if they do not let me dine with them. Besides, you want me to, do not you, Boots?" "Of course I do. And am I quite as entertaining to you as older girls, Boots, dear?" "Far more entertaining," said that young man promptly. "In fact, I have about decided to cut out all the dinners where you are not invited. It's only 3 more years, anyway, before you are asked about, and if I omit 3 years of indigestible dinners, I will be in better shape to endure the deluge after you appear and make your bow." "When I make my bow," murmured the child, "oh, Boots, I am in such a hurry to make it. It does not seem as if I could wait 3 more long, awful, disgusting years. How does my hair look?" "Adorable," he said, smiling across at Eileen, who had heard the question. "Do you think my arms are very thin, do you?" insisted Drina. "Dreams of Grecian perfection," explained Boots, and lowering his voice, "You ought not to eat everything they bring you. There will be doings tomorrow if you do." Eileen is shaking her head. "I do not care, people do not die of overeating. And I will take their nasty old medicine, truly I will, Boots, if you will come and give it to me." The younger Craig maiden also appeared to be bent upon self-destruction, and Boots's eyes opened wider and wider in sheer amazement at the capacity of woman in embryo for rations sufficient to maintain a small garrison. "There will be a couple of reports," he said to himself with a shudder like Selwyn's chaosite, "and then there will be no more Drina and Daisy hello." He broke off, astonished. "Well, upon my word of words. Phil Selwyn, or I am a broker." "Phil," exclaimed Nina. "Oh, Austin, and you never told us." Austin, ruddy and bland, came up to make his excuses. A little whirlwind of excitement passed like a brisk breeze over the clustered tables as Selwyn followed, and a dozen impulsive bare arms were outstretched to greet him as he passed, returning the bright, eager salutations on every hand. "Train was late as usual," observed Austin. "Philip and I do not mean to butt into this very grand function. Hello, Gerald. Hello, Gladys. Where's our obscure corner below the salt, Nina?" "Oh, over there." Selwyn had already caught sight of the table destined for him. A deeper color crept across his bronzed face as he stepped forward, and his firm hand closed over the slim hand offered. For a moment neither spoke, she could not, he dared not. Then Drina caught his hands, and Eileen's loosened in his clasp and fell away as the child said distinctly, "I will kiss you after dinner." "It cannot be done here, can it, Eileen?" "You little monkey," exclaimed her father, astonished. "What in the name of cruelty to kids are you doing here?" Mother let me observe the child reaching for a bonbon. Daisy is here, you did not speak to her. I am past conversation, said Austen grimly, and Daisy appears to be also. Are they to send an ambulance for you, Miss Craig, or will you occupy the emergency ward upstairs? Upstairs, said Miss Craig briefly. It was all she could utter. Besides, she was occupied with a pink cream puff. Austen and Boots watched her with a dreadful fascination, but she seemed competent to manage it. Selwyn, beside Eileen, had ventured on the former Letitia's voice unsteady, and not yet his own. Her loveliness had been a memory. He had supposed he realized it to himself, but the superb, fresh beauty of the girl dazed him. There was a strange new radiancy, a living brightness to her that seemed almost unreal. Exquisitely unreal her voice, too, and the slightly bent head, crowned with the splendor of her hair, and the slowly raised eyes, two deep blue miracles tinged with the hues of paradise. There's no use, sighed Drina, I shall not be able to dance. Boots, there's to be a dance, you know, so I will sit on the stairs with Daisy Craig, and you will come to me occasionally, will not you? Miss Craig yawned frightfully and made a purely mechanical move toward an iced strawberry. Before she got it, Nina gave the rising signal. Are you remaining to smoke? Asked Eileen as Selwyn took her to the doorway. Because, if you are not, I'll wait for you. Where? He asked. Anywhere, where shall I? Again the twin blue miracles were lifted to his, and deep in them he saw her young soul, waiting. Around them was the gay confusion, adieus, and laughter of partners parted for the moment. Nina passed them with a smiling nod. Boots conducted Drina to a resting place on the stairs. Outside, the hall was thronged with the younger set, and already their partners were returning to the tables. Find me when you can get away, said Eileen, looking once more at Selwyn. Nina is signaling me now. Again, as of old, her outstretched hand the little formality symbolizing to him the importance of all that concerned them. He touched it. A bientot, she said. On the lawn out there farther out, in the starlight, he whispered his voice broke me darling. She bent her head, passing slowly before him, turned, looked back, her answer in her eyes, her lips, in every limb, every line and contour of her, as she stood a moment looking back. Austen and Boots were talking volubly when he returned to the tables now veiled in a fine haze of aromatic smoke. Gerald stuck close to him, happy, excited, shy by turns. Others came up on every side, young, frank, confident fellows, nice in bearing, of good speech and manner. And outside waited their pretty partners of the younger set, gossiping in hall, on stairs and veranda in garrulous bevies, all filmy silks and laces and brighted expectancy. The long windows were open to the veranda. Selwyn, with his arm through Gerald's, walked to the railing and looked out across the fragrant starlit waste. And very far away they heard the sea intoning the hymn of the four winds. Then the elder man withdrew his arm and stood apart for a while. A little later he descended to the lawn, crossed it, and walked straight out into the waste. The song of the sea was rising now. In the strange little forest below, deep among the trees, elfin lights broke out across the unseen briar water, then vanished. He halted to listen. He looked long and steadily into the darkness around him. Suddenly he saw hair a pale blur in the dusk. Eileen. Is it you, Philip? She stood waiting as he came up through the purple gloom of the moorland, the stars' brilliancy silvering her waiting, yielding in pallid silence to his arms, crushed in them, looking into his eyes, dumb, wordless. Then slowly the pale sacrament changed as the wildrose tint crept into her face. Her arms clung to his shoulders higher, tightened around his neck. And from her lips she gave into his keeping soul and body, guiltless as God gave it, to have and to hold beyond such incidents as death and the eternity that no man clings to save in the arms of such as she.